Doctors, we are live now.
Thank you, Javed. You just take a pause of 20 seconds more. A very warm welcome to all the friends who have logged in to this evening's very interesting webinar on scientific writing and letting all of us know how it can be made easy. This is an effort, a combined effort of Delhi Orthopaedic Association with two journals, the Journal of Clinical Orthopedics and Trauma and Indian Journal of Orthopedics. And it's a series which has been going on for some years. And despite COVID, we've thought that we should continue with it. And a very good morning and good afternoon and good evening to people from different time zones. And this is a program in which we like questions. We love interactions, and there would be a area where you can just type in your questions, and the moderators of the sessions would take those questions and address them. And today's event is going to be taken further by none other than the famous writer from this part of the globe, Dr. Raju Vaishya, who is the editor-in-chief of Journal of Clinical Orthopedics and Trauma. And believe me, we have a galaxy of faculty, and each faculty is a select in himself. He would be in an editorial board of at least more than two journals around the globe. So enjoy the evening and clarify whatever queries you have on this interesting topic. And thanks, Dr. Raju Vaishya, to taking over this initiative, even in this difficult time. And please take over from here and introduce us, the course, and further proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalit, for your kind words and introduction. As Professor Lalit Mani has already mentioned, the main theme and aim of this webinar is to make scientific writing easy and also give you the tips and tricks to publish your scientific work. Most people have the mindset that, it is not their cup of tea because of complexities involved in the scientific writing, research, and publication. And that's what we want to make it simpler, because scientific writing and publications are not obligatory now. They are almost compulsory for. So do enjoy this webinar. As Dr. Mani has already said, we would like to have more questions. So the presentation time is about 50%, and 50% time in this webinar, or more than 50% time, is allocated for discussions. So do send your queries. Don't keep it to yourself, and we will try to answer through our moderators and panelists all your questions. So there is no doubt. First speaker today is our old editorial board member, Dr. Rajiv Thukral, who would start with the publication metrics. So over to, and all these talks are re-recorded to save time, but in case there is any problem in running these videos, then the authors, the presenter will present directly also. Thank you. So please run the video of Dr. Rajiv Thukral, please.
Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the 5th edition of the Jcot IJO Scientific Writing Program. Unfortunately, this time it's online, but let me just start off proceedings by talking about my topic, which is that of publication metrics. So, metrics has evolved over time. Metrics basically means measuring, right? It's evolved from measuring data regarding books, which is library-metrics, which is in books, or books in general, which is bibliometrics, to scientific books and literature, which is scientometrics, to infometrics to webometrics using the web, and finally we have reached this age of altmetrics, and I'll come to that when I talk about it. But what I'm going to be talking about today is basically these things. What is the definition of publication metrics? What are the uses? What are the sources? What are the different types? Article level, author level, journal level, the criticisms and distortions with the current way of checking metrics, what are fake, what are bogus metrics, and when there's been a call for change, what are alt metrics, and I'll then summarize what I just spoke about. So publication metrics can be defined really as the application of mathematical statistical methods to evaluate the impact of books and other media of communication on society, on the scientific community at large. In effect, what we're doing is we're using some quantitative measure to assess the output of our research, whether it's publications or whether it is citations, and use that data to understand how well it's being used and utilized. So, some
Basically,
common
these
indicators you
things.
all
What is
have heard of are citation index or H index or the impact factor of journals. And I'm going to touch about each of them. So the uses really is to assess the influence of this published research. How really effective is your research? Also, you can use it to rank journals, to rank different authors, different scientific organizations according to their journals, to assist the identifying of institutions and individuals for research funding, for grant applications, for growth opportunities, for promotions. In formulating new science policies, you need to take care of what the metrics are of that time. In identifying the core periodicals in a particular field of study, if you're looking at, say, a specific field of study, or identifying research trends and growth of knowledge. Therefore, if authors want to use these metrics, it's basically to make an informed decision as to which journal you want to send your article to be published to. And of course, the journals do it so that they can attract editors, sponsors, authors, readers, and therefore have collaborative research participation. The sources really are many. It's usually on the web now. The Web of Science or Clarivate is a pretty good source. You also have Scopus and Elsevier, which is similar to that of Web of Science. You have Dimensions, which is a new form of source for the publication metrics. You also have Google Scholar, which you all have heard of on Google. And of course, there's Altmetrics, which is using a lot of other data, the Twitter data, download data, blog data, and the blog post data, media data. And of course, you have individual identifier tools like the ORCID tool or the ResearchGate, which are networking sites for measuring metrics. So you have different types of metrics. There's article level metrics, and I mentioned citation count is one of them. You also have field-weighted citation index, and you have faculty opinions which are used in the past, but now most of them are shifting towards alt metrics. And you have author level metrics, which is the H index, which is used most commonly. Then you have the Einstein research profile, and also citation reports. And then the journal level metrics, which is really the journal, how good is it being sort of assessed in terms of the people who want to read it or who want to send their journal, their article to. So you have impact factor, then you have fire impact factors and eigen factors and other such factors I'm going to talk about. So first, let's start off with the article level metrics. The article level metrics, really, the most common one is the citation count, and you also have something called the field weight citation impact. And of course, now we are relying more and more on alternate metrics, which are alt metrics, which are taking into account social media. The sources include the journal citation report, which you can get online, and then the Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar, CiteSeerX, and PsycInfo, which are all different websites where you can look for article level metrics and citation count. The citation count is really how many times that particular article has been cited, or how many times you actually use it as a reference to your article. So understand the difference between citation and reference. I've put one article here which says paper R really has a reference to paper C, whereas C actually has a citation from R. So that's how you understand what a citation is and what a reference is. Then, of course, there's author level metrics, which are the Hirsch index or the H index, which is the number of times the papers have been published, each of which have been cited at least that many number of times. So if you have, say, a researcher like Dr. Vesh, who is a pretty prolific researcher and publisher and author, you will have his H index, which states that he has published H papers, and each of them have been cited at least H times. So this is a way of checking how productive and how much impact these authors have on the rest of the scientific community through their publishing work. And you can get this on different websites. Again, Web of Science is one of the most commonly used. Otherwise, you have Scopus and Google Scholar. Google Scholar metrics usually sort of takes into account their 5-year H index. So that's called the H5 index. So in the last 5 complete years, the articles published, the largest number which has been cited at least the same number of times as stated, because H index uses the last 2 years. So I'll just script. This is a different way of looking at the H index through different websites for different authors. And then, of course, there's journal level metrics. And journal level metrics, the most commonly used metric is the impact factor, again, using the Web of Science or the Journal Citation Report data. Unfortunately, that needs subscription. And you have score and the Scimago Journal Index Indicator SGR, which is a weighted score which is free on the web. So these basically tell you how important or how much the particular journal is considered important in scientific community according to their impact and their influence. They are ranked. The quality is then indirectly measured. And apart from that, you have the most common used index for measuring journal level metrics is the impact factor. So say, for example, the number of times the articles have been published in 2019 and 2020, 2 years, cited by index journals during 2021. And the total number of citable items that are published in those 2 years was B. The impact factor would be A by B. Just to give an example, the Jcot, for example, had, say, 300 citations this year for articles published in the last 2 years, and the total number of articles that are published in the last 2 years was, say, 120, which is, of course, just an example. The impact factor is 2.5 because it is 300 divided by 120. So the impact factor is the number of times an article which is published in the last 2 years was cited in that year. But that is just one way of measuring. You also have a 5-year journal impact factor, which is taking into account the last 5 years, which is better because many times articles are published and they don't get cited very soon. They're cited over time over the next few years. There's also something called a journal immediacy index, which is the number of times an article published in the current year is cited within the same year. So it's something which is like hot. Like, for example, you'll have a lot of articles on the coronavirus, which will be citing other articles on coronavirus, again, all of this year. The eigenfactor is sort of a weighted citation index, which basically measures the number of times an article in the last 5 years was cited in that year, with citations from more influential or more sort of important journals being weighted more than citations from less influential journals. So you have a lot of metrics, and this can also be through Scopus measure journal and country rank of a particular journal. So this is a Scimago journal ranking, which is the weighted citations in that year to papers published in the last 3 years. And that gives an sort of ranking of that journal in the whole year. You also have something called the source normalized impact per paper, which is the ratio of the source average citation count per paper and the citation potential of that particular subject field, because many times you have different subject fields which are more discussed and more cited. For example, basic sciences are more cited in most scientific journals by authors writing on various topics. Unfortunately, there's a big obsession about this impact factor. In the beginning, the journal impact factor was very important for journals. Then they had a declaration. I'm going to talk about that. And there were a lot of people misusing the impact factor to push up their own journal importance and to get sort of more senior authors to write, or more influential authors who had many more scientific articles to their credit to publish in their journals. And then what happens is it was distorted because people would cite them. So there were a lot of criticisms and distortions to this impact factor. Unfortunately, we all understand that journal metrics actually can never be used to evaluate an individual article impact, because you may find that one particular article in a journal may be cited 1,000 times, but the rest of the articles in that journal are not. So that sort of distorts the journal impact factor. Also, the scientific field that the journal itself belongs to influences the impact factor. If it is something to do with basic science, as I mentioned earlier, it has got more citations and therefore increases the impact factors. Articles from the journal like Nature or sort of basic sciences journals usually have a higher impact factor, and simply because they have to be cited by other researchers as well. And of course, there have been problems with self-citations and groups of authors who cite each other and honorary authorship, which all sort of distort the actual impact and the actual citation index of articles or the H index of authors and the impact factors of journals. And therefore, another problem, of course, is the review article sort of being published in certain journals, and they will obviously be cited more. So what happens is, and apart from the 2-year frames, which are sometimes too low, so that's why you have 5-year sort of 5-year time frames required. Another problem is that they are biased towards English language reporting journals, and unfortunately, if you ask these impact factor calculating sites like the Web of Science or Scopus, they are not able to show you the data source, and they cannot reproduce their impact factor easily to the public. So there have been a lot of criticisms to these metrics. In addition, there were many bogus or fake metrics which came out, like the scientific journal impact factor, or the Cosmos impact factor, or the global impact factor, and others which you can see here, which were basically asking for upfront payment for your metrics. And we had no clue whether they used a mathematical formula or whether they evaluated, and what was the data source. And the company also was sort of iffy. So therefore, there was a lot of sort of antagonism to these different journal metrics, which are used earlier, the publication metrics. And the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, the DORA, was conceived in the annual meeting of the American Society for Cell Biology in 2012. And they announced that the world scientific community needs to eliminate the role of this journal impact factor in evaluating research for funding, hiring, promotions, or institutional effectiveness, because it's very skewed, and it skews towards more senior journals or senior authors and senior or older organizations and journals. So a lot of people, more than almost 12,000 individual signatories and 460 organizations actually signed in, and even big ones, and they all said that we need to change it and no longer use just the original publication metrics. Similarly, the Leiden Manifesto was published in Nature in 2015 by Diana Hicks and Paul Wouters, and they spoke about offering best review, and they also said that we need to change. And then came what we now use, which is called altmetrics. The altmetrics, by definition, really is a set of newer alternative methods which are based on social media or the web to track, measure, analyze the research impact of articles, of authors, and of journals. And you want to see who's really actually reading or citing or talking about you, and that's real-time usage. This would depend upon not just what came out in scientific literature or in high-impact journals, but also how many times that the page was viewed online, how many downloads were taken from for your article or for your author site, the blog post mentioning your article, the comments, shares, likes in Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, and the interest that people had in their web search by sort of bookmarking that page or saving or subscribing. And these all would actually get together. And again, it seems very complicated, but there are different platforms that can actually assess this and track this. So you have something called altmetric.com, which is used by Digital Science and Springer Nature. You also have Impact Story, you have Plum Analytics by Elsevier. And again, many individual journals and publishers use these altmetrics, and they actually sort of calculate their altmetrics on the basis of how many times the article, for example, or the author has been cited or seen or even page viewed or mentioned in Twitter or linked to their web page and stuff. So a lot of these altmetrics are now available, and they also use different repositories. Now, repositories really help because many times you may not have the whole article, but you may have just presentation being shared in the university or the library being open, and that has been utilized and seen by people who want to access your data or your presentation or your publication, either through entire figures or just through slides. And they all help in sort of giving you an idea of your importance in real-time usage. So you have different ways of presenting this depending on which site you use. You use the Web of Science, or you use Scopus, or you use Mendeley, or you use individual like PLOS, individual journal data. You can actually own for an article for your own self as an author as well. So to take home, what I want most of us to understand is that publication metrics are just one tool that can be used to judge the quality of a journal or a paper or an individual, but they are not the only way. And biases should be considered, especially when there is good evidence that some metrics will be biased. So we need to use metrics that are supported by reliable data, and it's better to use a basket of publication metrics than one itself. And if you know how the metric works, that's the best way. Otherwise, if you don't know how it works, then please don't use it. Similarly, it's not very nice to say that one journal is better than the other only because of the metrics, and you have no idea why. So we need clarity about this, how you judge quality. And for authors, it pays to keep your publication metrics up to date, to understand which metrics may be used best to your advantage, because your metrics are going to be utilized by journals to accept your publication, to accept your presentation, to organizations to accept your job positions, and try to think of alternative ways. Remember, putting up your article on Facebook or on Twitter or on social media, WhatsApp is all useful in increasing your alt metrics. And therefore, we need to understand that this is one global way of assessing your research and publication data responsibly. A lot of other sites can be sort of accessed by the different people who are watching this, to understand that this all is where you need to read to understand how each thing's help. What questions I had by the end of my presentation, which I had to read for, of course, was that as a researcher, are these metric providers actually delivering the services that we need? Are they actually providing true real-time metrics? Are they open and transparent about how their metrics are calculated? And why do we have to judge a paper differently just because of the journal being a very good one, which we have sort of given a high impact factor? And is there any other way to access it? So I'll leave this for you to think about, and then maybe take questions from you later on. Thank you. I hope you had fun listening to this lecture. Bye.
Thank you, Rajiv, for a very elaborate lecture on a very difficult topic. As you rightly said, we need to have qualitative assessment of the journal as well as of the authors, and hence there are so many metrics that are available. The most important ones being an impact factor and site score for the journal, and H index, and number of downloads and all metrics for the authors. But we'll discuss it later after the lecture in the panel discussion. Now, may I invite the second speaker talk on original article by Dr. Sandeep Patel and Dr. Rohit Rambani from UK will be the moderator for this session. So Sandeep Patel's lecture, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to attend this workshop on research methodology for the IJO and Jcot initiative. Regards from Chandigarh. I will be talking about the original research article, how to do it right and make sure your research paper gets through to a journal at the first go. The objectives will be: 1, the parts of an original research paper, the sequence of paper writing, the reporting guidelines, and tips to get it right. So the broad structure of the research paper is the IMRAD, IMRAD. There's the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So it refers to the why is introduction. Why this research, particular one? How is the methods? How are we going to do this research? Results will be what are the results, and so what is the discussion part. So, okay, these are my results. So what? How should I compare with the rest? And then we conclude with a conclusion. So the overall geometry of the paper is like an hourglass, wherein the introduction and discussion will be a broad, without much focus, taking references elsewhere. The core of the paper is the methodology and the results, which will be the specific related to a research paper. So let's start with introduction. It can be divided into three parts. The first part is what is known about that particular research topic, what is unknown, and then the bridge between them. We introduce them about, okay, this is we know about such things in the literature. For example, we are doing a PRP study. What is known? We will tell, okay, PRP, we know the clinical results are this, and then now the variables. Suppose we want to find whether there is an effect on dose, then we introduce the unknown thing. And then the hypothesis. Always the introduction last part should be the aims or the hypothesis. The tips is to keep the section short, clear, concise, and non-technical, so that any reader at the first instance of an introduction finds it interesting. You should emphasize the importance of the study and how it fills the gap between what we know and what we don't. And at the end, introduce the research question. The don'ts are, do not answer the research question here, nor the details, the description, the speculation, and the criticisms of the study. You reserve it for the discussion. Methodology is the crux, the heart of the original research paper, wherein detailed explanation of how you conducted your research should be said. And why is it the findings? It's important. So some of the tips are, describe the steps you took as though you are telling a recipe, like steps 1, 2, 3. But again, be wary, not too much of the details. One of the important thing is, for example, you are doing a pediatric neck femur paper, research paper, and you're using a Delbit classification. You don't need to tell about a Delbit classification. You just reference it and that should be fine. So you should know how to control and what to write, what not to write. So the tips is, you break into smaller section with subheadings. When was the research? Where was the research? The authority or the approval, the sample selection, the data collection, how was it done? When was the follow-up done and how did you analyze? If you follow them, you will include everything. Next comes the results. It actually tells what our original research, the data showed, and point out any relationships and the trends on the findings. It should be always without a bias or interpretation, and it should be arranged in a logical sequence. You should again avoid providing unnecessary data. You should only provide what is required, what is specific for the research question. Usually if it's a research paper, the protocol, the thesis, the data is so much, but you should know the research question and relevant results to that. The tip is to be the friendly narrator. Result section for an average reader will appear so confusing, the statistics, values and all. So you should be a friendly narrator so that they understand what you're talking. Some tips are, you should avoid repeating the numbers that are already there in the tables and the figures. First, you prepare the tables and the figures, and then data should be restricted only there. You just summarize them in the table. For example, in again a thesis or a research, there will be a lot of papers on the demography, age, sex, distribution, all those things. Here, one single table summarizing the baseline characteristics will do it all. Rest details of the figures and tables will be dealt in another talk, and break the result section also into subsections. I'll tell you how to do that. The discussion. It means, what do the results mean? Okay, these are our results. What does the other people say about it and all those things? The section is the easiest to write, believe me, but it's the most difficult to write it well. In fact, you should be a salesman over here. You should actually interpret and sell your data to the journal, and then you have to convince the editor, see, this is my study. This is how it's different. So please accept it. A good discussion will make through to in a good journal. So you can break it again, restate the key findings of your paper, of the research question which you would ask. See, one more thing is, introduction is separate. Where you left the introduction, then you start the discussion. Do not just repeat or rearrange. This is one of a common problem we come across. The same introduction part we find in the discussion. They should be different. You should anticipate the reader's question and explain why your results are important. And again, do not include a lot of references in an original research paper, only what is relevant. In a systematic review or meta-analysis, it is different, but here, include good quality references in a controlled way. So you can divide it into: one is to summarize the results, your findings, and compare it with the other literature papers and the implications. And last, you add a shortcomings and the limitations, and you should be able to explain how you can improve and give a message of how to do a good studies further. And again, in some papers, the last paragraph should be the conclusion, or otherwise a conclusion can be a different part. Now, the sequence of paper writing: the methods and results come the first. That is the central report section. Because see, you have data, your research is done, you take out the results, methods, and then go into the introduction and discussion. So the sequence is as such. First thing is tabulate your results and the figures. So you got the tables and the figures, right? I would first go with the results. Let me see. Okay, these are the results. My result is done. The methodology: if it were a good study with a registration and a protocol, your thing is done even before the study is complete. You just have to write it, condense it according to the paper instructions. Last part is the introduction and discussion, the second last part, where you should write it in continuity, giving equal importance to introduction and discussion, and avoid mixing both. Last is the abstract, which is very important. So why does the abstract matter? For me, abstract is the front door to your paper. It's important even before you publish, when you upload, because if you want to avoid desk rejection from the editorial office, your abstract should be good. Second, an editor sends it for some reviewer to accept. The reviewer first sees the abstract. Only if he finds it good, he will accept a review. So that's why before publishing. After publishing, again, it's important, because a good abstract will tell the success of your paper. A good abstract and a title, so a PubMed search, the visibility will improve, so that people can include in systematic review and meta-analysis, and ensures the best possible outreach and citation. It's an art, actually, to write a good abstract. And more important is to catch the reader attention with a good title. So last part is to give a good title. It should be short and incisive with all the necessary keywords. For an example, you read these two titles, it's the same, but how we can change. Comparing 4 ml versus 8 ml intraarticular PRP injection for early ONE, a prospective randomized controlled trial. But how about this? Do we need to upgrade the dose of PRP from 4 ml to 8 ml for early ONE, a prospective triple blind study? So this is exactly how you have to take time and be creative in abstract and title. Then the rest of the abstract is a standard background, the aims, the results, and the conclusion. The tip is, before writing the abstract, check the abstract format in the target journal. Most of the journal will have different abstract format, so please stick to that. Next, reporting guidelines. This is what I want all of you to understand. There's an equator network. The reporting guidelines are ensured so that all researchers who are doing the research present their data in a uniform way, so that people can understand and communicate easily. The equator network was exactly built for that, and they have got reporting guidelines for randomized trials, observational studies, systematic reviews, animal trials, all those things. For example, a randomized controlled trial has got a concert documents, which is the consolidated standards of reporting trials. It has got a checklist and a flow diagram, a 25-item checklist, what all should be included in reporting, and a flow diagram which shows the progress of all the participants through the trial. If you can see this checklist in the methodology section, for instance, you can see the trial design, participants, what interventions, outcomes, what all were done, sample size. So if you follow this pattern, you will make sure your reporting will be fine. And here we have got the page numbers. At the end, this checklist with all the page numbers should be attached in the supplementary material. If you do that, the chances of acceptance is good. This is a flow diagram, again easily available in the PDF and a Word doc. You just have to put the numbers so we understand how the patient's progress, where all is the numbers lost to follow, all those stuff. For instance, one of our published article, you can see it's a randomized controlled trial. We have done a flow diagram of all the group distribution, how they've progressed. And if you see the material methodology, we have again split research design, sample and sampling, PRP preparation, intervention procedure, outcome measures, statistical analysis. So if you follow the checklist, you will make sure you won't miss any important thing. So moving from the randomized control trial, next is any cohort studies, case control, cross-sectional studies, which is the most part of the orthopedic research, is to present their case series and all. Again, we have a specific strobe statement that is strengthening the reporting of observational studies in epidemiology. It's got 22 checklist items. Again, detailed items of what should be there in methodology, what should be there in results, discussion also. If you follow this format, the paper will come out really good. And animal research, they have got an ARRIVE guidelines, that is animal research reporting of in vivo experiments. Again, a checklist is there. For example, one of the checklists for a paper which we uploaded, we have written where all line numbers, what all to see for. This says that you have followed a guideline and it gives you a good impression. So some of the smart tips at the end: spend time and get the abstract right. It should be short and crisp. Ask your colleague to read and comment on the clarity of the papers from a reader's perspective. Trust me, you will get a lot of inputs if you do this exercise. Shortlist the target journals even before manuscript preparation. If you have a manuscript, you should at least have 4 target journals in mind and write accordingly. Check the other guidelines of each of them and follow them. If it gets rejected one place, before submitting to other, see their author's guidelines and modify it. If there are any comments from the first, try to incorporate them. Now, the last part, if you want to target the top journals, the real planning actually starts much before the research. You should have done a good literature review. The methodology should be fine, best, but the most important is trial registration. Clinical trials should be registered in a publicly accessible database even before the first participant is recruited. So try major. Today, all the top journals, if your clinical trial is not registered, they won't accept it. It's as simple as that. Some journals, even if they don't have a required 2-year follow-up, they may not. So please, trial registration is important if you want to target good. So the WHO has got an international clinical trial registry platform where a lot of good trial registries are there. So for example, in India, it's the CTR, a clinical trial registry, and we got the US clinicaltrial.gov, which was the original one, which even gave guidelines to the WHO. So the clinical trial registry in India, for any research, we should do that. Remember, prospective registration, that's before enrollment of even the first patient. So my dear friends, the take-home message, the broad structure is the IMRAD. The sequence is always for me tables and figures first, then the results and methods, followed by last, the introduction and discussion. Abstract writing is an art and most important part. By following standard reporting guidelines, life is much easy. You can ensure that all important things are mentioned, and always consider trial registration if you want to target good journals. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep, for a very nice presentation on original articles. As you rightly said, although we have to follow the IMRAD guidelines in writing the paper when we submit it to journal, but while preparing it, it has to be very different. As you mentioned, first you have to concentrate on your material, methods, result, and then in the last you write. One thing which you have not highlighted, I would have liked, of course, abstract is very important for the readers, for the editors and reviewers, but similarly, equally important is the title. Your title should be very crisp and very to the point, conveying the message, and it should not be very complex and very lengthy. So title is also very important. I've got many articles accepted overnight by the editors just because of the title. So I think the text is important, but title is equally important. We'll discuss it later. So the next speaker is Dr. Professor Bhavokar from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He will be speaking on the systematic review. As you know, nowadays simple research is slightly taking a back seat, and more complex research in the form of systematic review and meta-analysis and randomized controlled trials are getting through. So it is important to understand what does systematic reviews involved? Over to Bhavuk Garg, please.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Today, my job is to cover the topic about the systematic reviews. We know that the systematic reviews, they are being done very commonly now. And the objectives of my talk will be to outline what a systematic review is, to discuss the scope and the formulation of a review question, how to form a protocol, how to do the systematic search of the studies, how to extract the data, and then how do we synthesize the evidence, and ultimately I will also touch a little bit about the meta-analysis. We know that there are two major types of reviews we usually see in the literature. They are in either the narrative reviews, which we call as the traditional reviews, and then there are systematic reviews, and then meta-analysis overlap quite a little bit with systematic reviews with an extra addition of the statistical analysis. So the narrative reviews, they are usually written by experts, but they don't follow any particular pattern or the particular methodology, and they are just the summary of the evidences. While the systematic reviews, they are done according to a fixed plan or a methodical system, and then there is a critical appraisal of all the work which they include in these studies. So what is a systematic review? It is a review of the evidence which is based on a clearly formulated question that uses a systematic and the explicit methods to identify, select, and then critically appraise those relevant primary research, and then you extract and then you analyze the data from those studies, and then you formulate your outcome in those systematic reviews. The data is nowadays exploding. The PubMed and the all databases, they are daily flooded with so many studies. And this picture, you can see that the how the data is accumulating. We are living in a world of data boom, and we don't know how to handle it. But the systematic reviews, they minimize the impact of the biases and the errors. They can help to end the confusions, because now for every question you can have you can have the evidence in favor of and as well as against it. These systematic reviews, they can highlight when there is not sufficient evidences. They can combine findings from the different studies. They can mitigate the need for further trials, and they also facilitate the rational decision making. They also help the practitioners to keep up to date with the evidence in that particular fields. So if we just compare these systematic reviews with the narrative reviews, so the systematic reviews, they are basically a more scientific approach to a review article. The criteria for including studies, they are determined in the beginning itself. There is a comprehensive search, and then you can combine the data in the form of the meta-analysis as well. And that's why these systematic reviews, they come at the top of the evidence pyramid. If we look at the stages of a systematic reviews, they basically, you first formulate a focused research question, then you define your inclusion and the exclusion criteria, then you search the literature, you select the studies, you assess the quality of those studies, then you extract the data from those studies, you analyze, and then you interpret results, and then you keep on updating it however it is necessary. So we will just see how to go about different steps. So you first formulate a question. These questions may be broad or they narrow, and then if your question is good, if it is well formulated, it will help in all the further process of the systematic reviews. They can depend upon the question formulation can depend upon the multiple factors. It also depends upon the question's relevance and what is going to be its impact and what are the available resources you have. So the broad question could be like, what is the ideal treatment for the lumbar canal stenosis? But it is like, there will be so many strategies or so many treatments described that it may be criticized for mixing apples and pears. While if you just add whether the fixation is necessary in lumbar canal after decompression of lumbar canal stenosis, that becomes a very narrow question, and there is a clarity of the objectives, and you can generalize those findings. So basically, we talk about the PICO framework. I'm hopeful that most of you know about the PICO format, so I'm not going to detail the PICO. So like a time-consuming question could be like, what is the best strategy to prevent knee osteoarthritis in old people? But if you put it in a PICO format, that is, our hyaluronic acid supplements are more effective in relieving knee pain then NSAIDs in patients with knee osteoarthritis. It's a very answerable question, and this is in the PICO format. So PICO basically is the P for population, I for intervention, C is a comparison group, O is the outcome, and the types of studies is again a PICO, is the T, which is the addition of the PICO. Addition to the PICO is the type of the studies which you can see. And then once you have formulated the question, then you form a protocol, and this protocol is the integral part of the process for the whole doing the systematic reviews. And you define your all inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, your methodologies, and the outcomes, etc. And we have this website called the Prospero, which is the CRD initiative. So you have to register your systematic reviews before your protocol on it, and this can basically avoid the duplication of the reviews. It can guide whether an ongoing systematic review is there or not. And then you look for the evidence. You do the literature search depending upon the terminologies, depending upon your databases which you have. You also search for gray literature. We will just discuss it. And you also look for the unpublished studies. So you must be all be aware of about the mesh, the medical subject terms headings. You have to all the components of the PICO question. You have to examine the abstracts also. You have to examine the various databases also. Like the young patient can include the adolescent, teen, child, and you can also make the use of the star, like the child star. Will also return the children, childbearing, childbirth, and so on. So you have to very carefully describe your search or the operators, and you have to also be aware of the various word variants like acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. If there is a hyphen in it, if there is no hyphen in it, and then if there is just immune deficiency, it is not immunodeficiency. So these are all the definitions of AIDS, and you have to search all of them. You have to search for the synonyms. You have to search for the plurals. You have to also look for the spelling which the variants, which is between the UK and the US. There are various databases like PubMed, Embase, Scopus, Web of Science. There is Sinhal, which is for the nursing one. Pedro is for the physiotherapy, and then Cyclanfo is for the psychology articles. You have to look for the gray literature. You have to hand search those selected journals and the conference proceedings, and you have to also look at the references of those articles which you have included in that. Gray literature basically refers to the academic, business, government, or the industry print, which are not controlled by the commercial publishers, like conference proceedings, research reports, government reports, dissertations, theses, research monographs, organization websites, and then there are various unpublished literature also. You have to also be aware of the Boolean operators like A or B, A and B, A not B. So these are basically, I think all of you are aware of these basic Boolean operators. Then you have to also use the reference manager software packages, because they removes the duplicates. You can import all these articles, and if you can retrieve your full text articles of the initial selections. If there is a doubt, it is always sometimes you have to take a call whether to include this article or not. Then you have to so ideally there should be more than one reviewer, and if there is to check for the reviewer agreement, there is a third reviewer should also be there. Then you document your search process, that how you are going to do the search. You look for that. You describe your databases. You describe the dates from which date you have searched. What search strategies you have to use. So everything has to be recorded, and you can always take the help of your librarians for this process. And then you extract the data from these studies. At least 2 review authors, they should independently extract data from these study reports. And one has to be very clear. One has to always go as per your methodology, which you have already described in the beginning. What effect measures you are going to discuss. What are you planning to group studies? Which studies you are going to include, and what information you are going to extract. Always remember your protocol and go according to that. Sometimes you have to also look for the level of judgment, whether the sufficient data and only the relevant data is to be extracted. There are softwares also available, and like the Word, Excel, Access, Covidence, and the Revman. There are several softwares which you can use for this data extraction. And once your data extraction is complete, then you sort out your data, you filter, you transform your data, because they have to be homogenized. Like Sometimes the articles, they use standard error, and sometimes they use standard deviation. So everything you have to see, and everything has to be, in the same format. And so it should be homogeneous data. And then you have to consider whether you're including only one study design, or there are various study designs. Then sometimes the different studies, they report data differently. So you have to consider all these things, and then you have to go by your protocol. Always go according to your protocol. Then you have to also appraise that the whatever the data you have extracted, whether they are good or not. Not all published literature is good. And then this is called the critical appraisal, where you analyze the validity, results, and the relevance of those particular studies. And there are various checklists available. Like this is a CASP appraisal checklist, which you can use for both qualitative and the quantitative studies. You have to look for the various biases which can occur during the various stages of your protocol design. For RCTs and the non-RCTs, there are different appraisal tools also available. I'm not going to detail, but you should be aware that there are checklists also available. For the CASP guidelines, there are 10 clear questions are there which you can use. Then once you have extracted the data, then you synthesize your data, you formulate them into a discussion format. And then you can present them in either in the table format. You can group and cluster them. You can use the various moderator variables. Like these are the tables where you can describe your inclusion and the exclusion criteria, and then you can look for your this thing. There is a Prisma flow diagram which is very, very important. So the Prisma is the preferred reporting items for the systematic reviews and the meta-analysis. This is the full form of the Prisma. So you basically identify your studies, then you screen them, then you include those studies which are eligible as per your protocol, and then you include those studies in your data extraction. Meta-analysis is basically when you also combine the data of the multiple studies, and the basic hallmark of the meta-analysis is this forest plot, which I will suggest that everyone should go and read it about it. So these are basically these small squares. They just denote the individual studies, and then this oblique square basically, or the diamond shape, this thing is the complete denotes the complete data. And then if it is the confidence interval is towards the right, then it goes in favor of the treatment. If it is on the left, then it goes into the against that particular treatment or the question. You have to interpret your results, so your all important outcomes, and how the values and preferences may bear on the balance of benefits, and all those things you have to be very careful. Reference manager you should use for sorting out all the articles and keep all citation retrieved. Sometimes you can duplicate them, so you have to use them for deduplicating them, and you can also use the quotes and notes. There are various registries, tools, and archives available which can help you in reducing the risk of biases in your systematic reviews. There are appraisal tools also available, like AMSTER 1 and AMSTER 2. AMSTER 1 basically is only for the randomized trials, and AMSTER 2 is also including the non-randomized control trials also. And there is a grade working tool also, which is used for the grading of recommendations, assessment, development, and evaluation. So whatever data you have extracted, you can also grade them according to and you can form the recommendations based upon them. And there are software also available which you can use for this thing. So Prisma and Prospero we have already discussed. So the most important thing about the systematic reviews is to be organized, follow your protocol, and then your systematic reviews should be perfect, and it should not have any bias. Thank you.
Thank you, Babu, for solving a very complex type of research that most people are afraid of. As you rightly said, it involves so many complex procedures that it is usually not the cup of tea for most researchers, especially in the beginning. Although systematic reviews are difficult, but they are now being mastered by many researchers, to the extent that recently I sent a systematic review to Journal of Arthroplasty, and they say now we are fed up of having so many systematic reviews. We would rather prefer an original research paper than a systematic reviews. So that's how things are now changing, but we'll discuss it. It is an important research with higher level of evidence attached to it. It usually gives a satisfactory outcome of the established knowledge that is available, and to conclude the recent findings from the existing literature. So the next speaker in this session, who's the last speaker, is no less than Dr. Ashok Shyam, who would be speaking on the case report. As you know, case reports are the most commonly submitted types of article, especially by the beginners. And because of their low level of hierarchy, they are attached with very high incidence of rejection. And hence there are several special journals focusing only on case reports that are now publishing case reports. And Dr. Ashok Shyam is also editor-in-chief of one of the very famous such journal, which is known as Journal of Orthopaedic Case Reports, which is indexed in PubMed also. And he will be telling us the tips and tricks in getting your case reports published. Over to Dr. Ashok Shyam.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on one of my favorite topics in research, the case report. I thank the Jcot and the IGO team for organizing this extremely important virtual event for research, especially for budding researchers. So let's go on with my topic. I'm the founding editor for JOCR, which is publishing since 2010. So I do have some experience in looking at trends in case reports, how they have grown, how they have evolved, not only the reporting part, but also how the authors have written those cases, how the readers have perceived those things. So I'm going to share a lot of my insights rather than making it into a very technical lecture. Like everything, I always begin with reviewing what is the history of that particular topic or particular subject. When we go through the history of case reports, what is most important to note that most of our medicine is evolved through careful observations. So there were men that have noted what generally answered best for their patients and deployed that in their clinical practice. That is what a case report is, or that is what an observational study is. So careful observation, clear recorded description, and deductive reasoning that will promote and add to the existing literature and to clinical practice. So that is what the aim of a case report is. That's the basis of all case reports and basis of all medical literature. Now, as far as case reports are concerned, I refer to this very, very interesting story, which almost all of us are aware of, the tortoise and the hare. It's a very good surrogate for a case report where you have clear, precise writing. It is easily recalled whenever needed. It has a strong practical message. So slow and steady wins the race. So it's a very simply put up story which connects to its reader very effectively. Even it connects to children. So that's how the case report should be. Of course, there are technical things. There are a lot of references in scientific writing. But essentially, when the reader should finish reading your case report, he should remember it in a very short format, which he can recall easily, very similar to something like this particular story. So as an author also, you need to tell your story properly. Getting started to write a case report, how do you start? What first question that comes to the mind is what qualifies as a case report? Are only rare cases accepted as case reports? So in 2014, I wrote an editorial on busting this myth, and I actually wrote down all the ideas that could qualify as a case report. But the most important thing is any case that has a clinically valid learning point, it qualifies as a case report. So that for me as an editor of JOCR is a case report. It has a good clinical learning point with context to existing literature. So the reader will get something out of the report. That is what qualifies as a case report. So this is the essential question, whether the publication of this case will enhance the knowledge of reader and help them to provide better treatment for their patient. Anything you want to write, even if it is a case report or a randomized trial, ask this essential question. If the answer is yes, that research is a valid research and you should go ahead with doing it. So this is the essential question for all research projects, including case reports. So this is my key learning point 1. So clinical relevance has to be established beforehand before you start writing the report. What qualifies? Very rare diseases, association of diseases, uncommon presentation of common diseases, cases which contradict current knowledge, a new disease entity. Now, these are all established as case report criteria in most of the case reports journals. But most importantly, for us in orthopedic surgery, improvisation. So decision-making changes intraoperatively if there is an event occurring and you have managed it. Rehabilitation, there is something different that you have done. Complications specifically. So these are also things that qualify for us as orthopedic surgeons. I put it as DIC, deviation, innovations, and complications. These are all case reports that you can publish. And if any of your cases have this, it can be easily published. As an editor, I get this question very often. I got this great case. Is this publishable? People meet me at conferences or in hallways and ask me this question. It's very difficult to answer this question. The only way to answer this question is literature review. There is no other way to give a valid and precise answer to this. And results possibly compare and contrast with the literature. So this is very important, which we follow most of the time in JOCR. We ask them to put the review of literature in a table format. Photos of clinical science, surgical pictures, diagnostic studies are very, very important in getting your case reports published. If you're missing these things, you might get a rejection even if the case report is good. In discussion, you have to focus on the main learning point. Like I said, in the first step, you have to ask the question whether this case report will add some clinical relevance to the literature. Discussion is just bringing out that clinical relevance in context with the existing cases in literature. Synthesize your experience with evidence. Now, case report not only is evidence-based, but a lot of it is also experience-based. So it is a very good synthesis where you can put up your experience as well as evidence in context and present your discussion to the reader. Do not write a book chapter. Again, this is a common mistake which a lot of young writers do. Like introduction, in discussion also, they start discussing the topic. No, the discussion is only on your main result. It's not at all on your topic. So keep that in mind. References always include most recent references, or at least the most recent 10 references if they are available. Incomplete literature review is one of the most common cause of rejection. Now, why do I say this? Is not because your references are incomplete, because incomplete literature review brings out loopholes in your introduction where you have established that this case is worthy of publication. Literature review is very important to establish that fact, and that is the fact that will get your case report published. So in literature review, you have to do in depth and you have to spend a lot of time in reviewing the literature. Key point 3 is follow the journal guidelines. So I have detailed the structure of a case report in my earlier slides, but you have to follow the journal guidelines that are specific to each and every journal. So they want you to format in a particular format. You need to follow that. Otherwise, again, you'll get revisions and rejections. What next after you've finished writing the case report? Always get help, get second opinion or third opinion. Get advice early, especially regarding the key message and reason for the case report in terms of why it should be published. Get others, your colleagues, your peers, or your research group, get involved in this particular case report. Just give them the draft to read and ask their comments and opinions on how, if they have any suggestions for it. My best advice to do this is have a literature peer review also. So go through the last 10 case reports which are related to that particular topic. Read them, think about why they were reported and how did the author get the message across. So how did the author get the clinical message across is very, very important and a subtle art. So writing a paper, writing a case report is not only science, it's kind of art also. And once you read these papers with that angle, you'll start understanding that how the authors or the artists have put up their message across in certain sentences, in certain words, with help of literature. So you try and learn that art also. It's not only just technicalities or scientific structure, it's also an art how to put it. So to learn that art, you have to read and revise your case report as much as possible. So that's the key advice 4. Ethics in publishing a case report. As for other kinds of research, consent is very important. Consider the privacy laws of your nation or your local body. You have to maintain the confidentiality of the patient. Even if the patient has died, you have to take consent from next of kin also. I will personally suggest that you can deliver the copy of published paper to the patient or the relative. They always feel happy when they get something, when they get to know that they have added to advancement of science. So that's a very good point. Common pitfalls: using sensational language, writing as a theory short note. This is very commonly seen. Unnecessary trying to establish rarity of the disease. So it is this percentage to this percentage, and then from that you again derive another percentage and try to establish the rarity. That's not important. Rarity of the disease is not really much importance. It's how clinically relevant it is and what the reader will get out of it. Not reading enough is a crime in writing any kind of paper. So if you are read enough, you'll be easily able to write a case report. In summary, my key points are: you have to establish the clinical relevance, thorough literature review, follow the journal guidelines, read and revise. Every case is a potential report, either as a case report or a part of a case series. So every case that you see, do or operate is a part. Case report may be the beginning of a glorious and successful academic career. Even I began with a case report and then climbed the ladder. Tell your best story. Remember the story again. It has to be simple, easily recalled, has to have a good moral, good inference to carry, good clinical inference. Tell your best story. Best of luck from my side. Thank you very much for this opportunity again.
Thank you, Ashok, for a very wonderful talk as usual. Although case reports are probably the most commonly type of research that is submitted to any journal, but they are the most challenging now to publish for several reasons. One, higher impact factor journals have stopped taking case reports, or most journals take case reports if they are exceptionally of good relevance, otherwise they suffer from desk rejection. There are other problems associated with case reports, like each journal has several author guidelines, like author numbers, usually 3 to 4 for case reports, limitation of words, which may be up to 1,500 or so. limitations in figure. So it is very difficult for the authors to describe their case in great detail to the journal. So it becomes then an art how to write a case report, as Dr. Ashok Sham has given lots of tips and tricks. And for the senior authors, a very important and simple thing to do is to think, if I have got a very rare case, that is probably their pearl, because if they have not seen or done such a case in their practice of 30 to 40 years, that must be rare and it has to be investigated by doing a good review of literature, as has already been highlighted by Ashok. So, if you think there is something very rare, you must investigate. And in my experience, I find 9 out of 10 times it is actually rare, and you can then publish it with a lot of authority. Thank you very much. And now I will give the podium to Dr. Rohit Rambani, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon from Lincolnshire, UK, and he will be moderating this session and would invite all our panelists for the first session discussion. Over to Rohit.
Thank you, Dr. Vaishya, for kind words. And it's been excellent talks in the morning. I must congratulate all the speakers. Can I invite the panelists, Professor Lalit Meni, who's Editor-in-Chief of Indian Journal of Orthopaedics and also the President of Delhi Orthopaedic Association. Professor Vijendra Singh, who is President of British Indian Orthopaedic Society, is a consultant orthopedic surgeon at Medway Hospital in Gillingham. Dr. Praveen Shada, he's also a member of editorial board for IGO and JCOT. Dr. Rakesh Pochu, he's a consultant MSK radiologist at Birmingham with us. Dr. Mohit, he's a consultant orthopedic surgeon from Delhi, and Dr. Chabra, who's the chief of spine surgery in Delhi as well, known figure. Can we get all the panelists and the speakers on the screen, please, so we can start discussing? We're going to start with Dr. Tukral. Rajiv, there was a question mentioned about which is the journal which is suitable for publishing my research. And I think this is the key bit which all the authors would want to know, whether this journal is suitable. Shall I publish in IGO, JCOT, PJJ, Lancet, or Nature? How are we going to answer it, especially if I'm an academic researcher or academic surgeon?
So I think, considering that's a pretty tough question to answer, because I had the question too many times. But one must really look into 2 or 3 basic elements. Number one, what's your target going to be like? Are you looking at reaching out to the whole world? Obviously, you want to reach out to the whole world more, or you're reaching out to something more local, something more regional. That's number one. Second is, how confident are you of the quality of the work that you've done? Because many times you have work which is done not so well, methodologically, you know it, you present it in a better way, but you know deep down inside that the work is actually not that well done. And you send it to a journal which has got very stringent criteria to get it included, and you'll be rejected, and you will find that you get frustrated very easily. So you have a clear expectation of which kind of journal you want to send it to on the basis of how good your study has been. Because if your study is really well and methodologically done, I'm sure the better journals can also take it. But then you come to whether it is relevant to your area of research and your interest, and also reaching out to the population that you want to. A lot of people today actually don't look at it this way. They also look at it from the point of view of it reaching the general masses. So altmetrics comes there. So I think, again, I'll ask other speakers to also answer this question, but for me, these are the criteria I'd use.
Thank you, Rajiv. Can I get editor's perspective? Professor Meni, what would you suggest to a author who's trying to submit this paper in a journal which is probably higher than its. Well, how do we choose which is the right journal from an editor point of view?
Thanks, Rohit. That's a pretty important question to a researcher, whether it is his first publication or it's his 100th publication. So I think there are two players here. One is the journal, and the other is the research. And the journal is run by the team, the editorial team, and the research has been done by another research team. So I think the starting point could be the aims and scope of the journal. Please have a look at what is the aim and scope of a journal. So what does this exactly mean? Like for example, you have a new type of a fixation modality, for example, plating and scaphoid fractures. Now, we don't have that implant at all in India. And if it's the aim and scope of the journal is to share knowledge of the Indian region, and the implant itself is not available, probably it will never fit into the priority of the journal. So please have a look at the aim and scope of journal. Please have a look at the table of content of that particular journal in the last few issues and the last few years, which gives you an idea. And as Rajiv has very rightly brought this point out, that the surgeon knows what he has done, whatever the X-ray may say, and the researcher actually knows what is the strength of his study. So that is another key thing which helps you in deciding your journal. And accordingly, if your research is of a very high standard, you would like to pick up a journal of high impact factor. So the metrics are useful. Like I can give you one example. If you want to sort of choose journals, you can choose a database, for example, Scopus, and enter all the possible journals listed in orthopedic traumatology and sports medicine. It will give you a list of 250. And then they also give you the details of the metrics along with. And that gives you a bird eye view. And for example, if your research is particularly in foot and ankle, then you shortlist maybe 7 to 10 foot and ankle journals out of that list and then go. So there would be some sort of science behind going and choosing a particular journal. So that's what I feel are the important issues in choosing a journal.
Thank you, Professor Mani. Another question from Bhavuk for is that we often hear about I-10 author index, especially in Google Scholar. So which index do you think as an author I should prefer, or I should have preferred the one which has given me a better score?
So I-10 basically refers to the number of articles that have been cited at least 10 times. Now, ideally, if you have a starting out author, a person who's just starting out, who's done a few articles only, he wouldn't have had so many articles which have already been cited 10 times. So as you do better and better research, only then you come to say a higher I-10 index for your own self. Your question that you asked me is, what does the author want, or what does the author look for? Is that the question that you asked me?
What's the author looking for when he's putting this through?
Yeah, so these are basically indices for self sort of criticism or self-judgment. What's your own I-10 index and what's your own H index? So the author is really not going to sort of change by these indices unless he publishes more articles. So he gets a higher I-10 index, or he gets a higher H index only with more publications, with citations.
Thank you, Rajiv. I'm going to move to some of the questions for Sandeep. If any of the panelists has any questions, please fire away. My first question to Sandeep. Sandeep, you mentioned in one of the talks on how to make when preparing a review, you mentioned that when we're doing these reviews, you do the tables and charts first. Majority of us will do a methodology first. And I think the key bit is majority of the papers as a reviewer or editor, we rejected based on poor methodology. We don't even go to the results. If the methodology is poor and there are lots of loops, it'll get rejected at the desk level or at the first reviewer level. So what are your thoughts?
No, yeah, I see. There is importance for, especially for original research paper. As I rightly said, the crux of the paper is methodology. There is no doubt. I'm not taking away anything from that. But the message when you're writing a paper, there are basically two schools of thoughts. One is always you have to write the central part. That is either the methods and the results. But here there are two aspects. If it's a good, well-conducted study with proper what I mean to say is it's gone through a review board in your institution and ethical clearance board and all, then methodology is already done. Understand? But why I said writing results is, see, we want the paper in a very condensed form, in a good looking form and easybility. So this point is especially for the young research writers, how to compile their paper. So the sequence. So what usually happens is they go to a statistician, they get the results. First thing is tabulate them and take out the figures. So we have the tables, we have the figures, right? Then we know the results, the required results. But then methodology and results are one part. In now, suppose as a clinician, I go back, dig into my last 30 cases of a pelviacetabular fracture. Then I want to do a research. Then here it's the results which matters and not the methodology. And unfortunately, for most of the orthopedic surgeons, for us academicians, we have all the registries. We do a study. Our methodology is right already there. But the real challenge is to publish these case series and these volumes of the clinical. There, it's always, if you want to do it, this is how you have to do it. Dig in your 30 cases, tabulate them, get the results right, and then when you have to do the methodology, now it becomes a retrospective, right? So here, what you have to do is go back to the STROB guidelines, because here it's a case series. So there is a complete checklist given the STROB. You just open it. In the methodology, what all should be there, even for a case series. You just have to put in your paper as per that, and your paper is done. At least you know that your methodology has addressed what all is required. So that's how you build up on that.
Good. I think the take-home message is that we go to the checklist and we follow the checklist by the book, and then it'll be followed. Another question is...
Can I add something here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I think Sandeep has brought out an excellent point. He's trying to emphasize that you need to look at your master chart and at your data and start there. What happens is the classical example of a postgraduate student completing his thesis and his guide telling him, okay, now convert it into a paper. And the guide asks him after 1 week what happened. He says, I am writing the review of literature. So that's what Sandeep is trying to emphasize, that you need to look at your data, which is the money. And in a classical thesis, the material method is already written. So you just need to prune it up. And definitely you need to write the introduction second last and the abstract absolutely last.
Yes. Any of the panelists wants to add anything else? Okay, I'm going to ask another question regarding... Yes, Professor Vijay?
Sorry, one of the questions was about the original article was registering it with an agency, especially if you're doing a randomized trial. I think that's something the authors need to be aware of. And some of them will allow retrospective registration. But question to Sandeep is there a country-based database, or how do you decide where you're going to register your study?
Yeah, at least for the Indians, we have the clinical trial registry. Before that, the US registry clinical.gov.in, whoever had, and some institution like PJ also has. So, but now after the CTRI is in place, for any new researchers from India, we cannot register there. But the WHO initiative, the slide which I showed, there are almost 25 registries across the world which are already registered. So a broad message for us, and as a part of it, all our research we register in a clinical trial registry India. It's a very easy method. The only thing is, don't let the student do it. We as a guide should take the responsibility to do it. That is the only tip, because the student may not really understand how it is done. But trust me, you get back the registration within 15 days time. But as a matter of policy, all my research projects, at least I keep a 3 to 4 months window, because the rectification clearly says, suppose you commit your date as XYZ date. And then if it is not there, there is no way you are going to get registered. So always start it 4 months prior, but you will get it usually in 15 days time. And CTRI is the message for all Indians. And you go to the WHO site, you have got all the list of the registries. And this again is a standard ICMJE, the International Committee for the Editorial Boards. They follow these registries. Only if they're registered in these registries will your paper go through the top journals.
Thank you.
So, Rohit, one comment from my side.
Yes, Dr. Chhabra.
I had a question here for the panel. I thought how good a research study or a publication is based on how important is the research question and how well you have planned it, right? So if you have planned it well and you have the research question from the beginning, right? And this is especially for the youngsters. So the first thing you need to do is write the introduction, because you know what is available and you know what are the gaps and what is your research question. And then you have a methodology already framed. So why are we suggesting that we write the whole manuscript at the end? For a good research study, you should have your introduction and methodology ready even beforehand. In fact, if you register it, you will have it ready even beforehand. And all you need to do then is tabulate the results and do the discussion. So that was what confused me a bit. Am I wrong in this suggestion? Also, shouldn't we suggest that all theses should be such? We should aim at publishing them rather than retrospectively trying to put the question of publishing them. So we should plan a thesis such it has to be published. This would be how we would proceed forward. So these were just two things which were coming to my mind. I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Dr. Chhabra. Very, very good points. I think, Dr. Sharda, do you want to come in on this? Lalit wants to come in. I think we did last year, we did the course, and there were lots of PG students who were writing these theses. And we focused a lot on thesis writing and how they can convert their thesis into papers. So I think that's the key. Dr. Benny?
Yeah, Dr. Chhabra is absolutely right on raising that for clarification of everybody who is logged in. So he's right on the process. So the process starts with a research area. It could be spine, canal stenosis, and then you gradually go down to a specific question. For that, you need to do a literature search, and out of the literature search, you will get to know what is known and what is not known. That modifies your hypothesis. So that's the absolute process of how the research has to be designed, and actually that is a part of the protocol of the research. So
can I just...
This is the basis of the beginning of the protocol. Yes, Dr. Raju?
Amongst all the panelists, there is only one non-orthopedic surgeon. That is Dr. Rajesh Botchu. He is MSK radiologist from a very famous and very busy unit in Birmingham, Royal Orthopaedic Hospital, Birmingham. So I would invite him to give his perspective.
I was coming to it
on these topics.
Yeah.
No, means the only thing I wanted to add was, it was a beautiful lecture by Sandeep. I use a different way, and that's what we follow here. Means I agree with Mr. Chhabra. We normally tend to do the introduction and the methodology because it's already there. So we tend to write that, and the results obviously you have to wait. The discussion, the first part of the discussion is normally based upon what's already there in the literature. And we normally fill that first. And then as the results come, you fill the result section, and then you finish off the discussion and you just write the conclusion. That way, half of the paper is done by the time your results are there. So we do simultaneously. And that way, the output, the stress on the author is much less because he has done half of the work by the time the results are being collected.
I agree, Dr. Rajesh. The key bit is when you're submitting a proposal, you have already done the introduction and you're submitting a methodology. So that bit is already done. And as you rightly said, the first part of the discussion is what is available in the literature, and then you fill up the rest. And I think that's the key bit of filling it up. But yeah, it's not every paper is randomized controlled trials. A lot of our papers are case series where the methodology is done after we've got all the data. And that's where Sandeep's point of following the guidelines, the checklist is very important. Let's move on to Babuk's presentation.
I had something, Rohit.
Yeah, Babuk and then Lalit. Yeah.
Just to the Sandeep, the talk, I just want to add about the importance of regulatory approvals related to, your particular trial or whatever study you are doing it. So like in India, we have several regulatory requirements. Ethical clearance alone is not sufficient for many papers. Like if you're doing something related to stem cells or the biologics, there is a separate committee from the ICMR. You have to take clearance from the ICMR regarding that. If you are collaborating in any sense with some foreign investigator, then there is a health ministry screening committee. So you have to take clearance from the HMSC clearance from that thing. For simple case reports, you have to keep the patient consent forms. So these sort of regulatory requirements, they are actually very important. For if you're doing a new implant or a new drug, there is a DCGI, the Drug Control Journal of India. You have to take clearance from them. Certain institutes of national importance like AIIMS, they are exempted from it if it is not a regulatory trial. But still, if it is a regulatory trial, you have to take clearance from them. So just ethical clearance alone is not sufficient for many things. For systematic review also, it has to be registered on the Prospero. So these things, one investigator should be aware. Otherwise, unknowingly, he may be trapped in some, litigations and sort of things.
Thank you, Babu. Lalit?
Yeah. So what I was trying to sort of bring forward is that any research has two steps. One is a proposal, which is classically called protocol in thesis, and second is the thesis. So Sandeep has tried to bring out this point that we start with an introduction and a protocol and a proposal to formulate our hypothesis. However, when we complete our thesis and come back to paper writing, why is it asked that introduction should be written last is that we want to do a final recheck of review of literature and just check in if something new has come in. Because if we've not done that, we are missing out on literature. So it starts with an introduction, and your last part again is an introduction just before your final abstract. And the CTRI issue, now it's almost a guideline that all postgraduate theses, whether it is MS Orthopaedics or a DNB, they have to be registered on CTRI. Now, there is a guideline. However, the level of seriousness which various universities are following is variable. But the guideline is there. So the step is that you get the ethics, you get a college, university ethical clearance, and then you apply for your CTRI. And as Sandeep has told, it takes around 15 days to 1 month to get that. And please register your first case only after you get your CTRI registration. That's a mandate which is required. So that's the input from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Mani. Sandeep, I'm going to ask you a question and then you can add both of them. You mentioned about making a heading interesting. Can it backfire? Because when you want to get the citations, you might not get that on when they're doing the search on title, because it'll backfire. You haven't given enough information. So answer that, and you wanted to answer something.
Yes, definitely it can backfire, but for me it has always helped actually. But yes, it can backfire. But now, see, today's world, I mean, there are a lot of factors apart from the titles and abstracts which make your paper through. It is how busy the journal is, where it is located, all those stuff. Things have changed. But the traditional way is a good title and a good abstract will make sure that it passes the editorial board. And I think Dr. Raju Vaishya sir and Lalit Mani sir, you will be better able to explain this, whether it will backfire them or the other way around. And before that, the comment what I wanted to make was the consensus for the discussion which we have been having, like which part to write. Traditionally, for any thesis or any research, that is different because everything is there. But if you see their thesis or research, the introduction 3-page review of literature is 5 pages. In those cases, my thesis student, what I do is before his results, I would have done everything, introduction, everything is done. then finally results discussion is submitted. But this particular sequencing is what to prepare the manuscript, and exactly like what Dr. Lalit Mani sir just told, when you want to do a research paper, it has to be condensed. You don't want to miss out anything. There, this tip comes into hand. But well, anything works.
Is there anything Dr. Karthik Anger want to add? He has not spoken anything.
Rehan, you wanted to say
Rehan,
something?
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I will.
Just adding on to what Dr. Sandeep is saying, Dr. Rohit, I think the title and the abstract are important as far as the search is concerned, but something which we tend to miss out are the mesh terms and the keywords. Because if you look at how Google searches or how PubMed searches, it goes not by the title, but it goes by the mesh terms and the keywords. So how frequently your paper is going to be cited and how frequently your paper would be seen by other authors also depends on these two things. And these are a neglected area which I think early researchers should definitely focus on and try to get in the right keywords and the mesh terms when they're writing their papers.
Okay. Thank you, Rehan. I'm going to get on to the next paper of Bhavuk. Bhavuk, when you, in the journey of writing, you think you want to write a systemic review or meta-analysis, when do you decide that, oh, this is not possible? Either of them are not possible because there are not enough articles on this topic. What's the minimum number of articles you need to filter out before you think I can write a systemic review?
It can be taken in two ways, Rohit. Like, as properly pointed out earlier also, that the methodology is the most important thing. So if you have formulated your protocol of as well as the methodology of
when you review, in the journey of writing, you think you
journals, they even publish your protocol also. And then there are scenarios, when you may not find a single study. So you can call it as a failed systemic reviews or the zombie review or the empty review, but still you have a proper protocol. And then you also have an evidence that there is no evidence right now. So on one hand, you can say that you can publish a systematic review protocol without having any study. On the other hand, if you just have one, then the systematic reviews is not good because you can just read that article. There is no need of systematic review as such. So ideally, if you have at least 2 studies, you can publish a systematic review. And it also depends upon the quality of those studies. So if those 2 studies, they are of very high quality, then only those two studies, they are also good enough for publishing systematic reviews. But ideally, if there's a mixture of studies and this thing, then at least people say that 5 to 10 studies, they make a good systematic review as such.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Sarda, you want to comment?
Just wanted the comment from Bhavuk of what he thinks. Like, I think Dr. West mentioned earlier during the talk that there's been many journals are now fed up of too many systematic reviews. And I think there's been an explosion of systematic reviews over the last year due to pandemic. Everybody was sitting at home and typing away on their computers. So, Bhavuk, what do you think, going forward in the next couple of years, do you think this might meet the same fate as case reports, wherein journals would just refuse, or authors would face desk rejection for submitting systematic reviews in terms of, fresh researchers looking for projects? Do you think, what would you advise them?
If we see, when we talk about systematic reviews and meta-analysis, now we are going ahead more scientifically in those areas also. Now we are not talking about meta-analysis. Now people are talking about the network meta-analysis, or now the people are talking about the pair-wise meta-analysis. So these are, another more high quality sort of meta-analysis in the types of the analysis. In network meta-analysis, you have broad question, you combine the multiple treatments, you have high RCTs of multiple treatments, and then you can combine all those RCTs into one meta-analysis. Like for pair-wise, if you have a single treatment, there are multiple RCTs, you can combine them. So there are, the people are progressing towards it and more scientific this thing. So I think they are going to stay. But the quality of the meta-analysis and the systematic reviews, they are also going to matter a lot. Now we have the special, the critical appraisal tools available for systematic reviews. Earlier, the Prisma was the only standard thing. But now people have realized that the Prisma is only good for the interventional studies. For observational studies, the MOOS guidelines, they are more effective.
Similarly, we have tools like Amster 1 was the assessment of multiple systematic reviews. So it is a checklist. It is a critical appraisal tool, which was only good for the randomized controlled trials. Now we have the Amster 2, which also includes the non-randomized controlled trials also. So if you can show that your study has, good reliability and validity on Amster 2 and all those things, then I think there should be no reason that a journal should decline your systematic reviews. But yes, if you just follow a rat race, like, just publishing systematic reviews, if their quality is not good, then I think they are not going to be published as they were being published in the recent past.
Bhavuk, I just want to like you to discuss what are the drawbacks of systematic reviews, because when we see these systematic reviews, most of them come to an end saying that most multicentric trials are required, and they really do not give you good conclusion. And nowadays, we are also seeing systematic reviews of already published systematic reviews. So are we going too far ahead with these research?
That is the important thing to realize, that just doing a systematic review is not enough. Doing a systematic review with a stringent methodology is very important. And then to draw a meaningful conclusion is also important when you're doing a systematic review. So the systematic review one has to realize that the question, what is a quantitative question or a qualitative question, it also matters a lot. For every question, systematic review is not good. For a quantitative question, the meta-analysis is a better thing. Simultaneously, if you are doing systematic reviews with like garbage in and garbage out, so if your studies inclusion the criteria, they are not good, then obviously you are not going to get the good results. And then now we have the good, like I talked about, the grade methodology. So once you incorporate those things into your systematic reviews, you will get something meaningful out of your systematic reviews. So again, and when you send these systematic reviews to reviewers, it is also important that those reviewers, they understand how to evaluate those systematic reviews. Then only you will get the proper systematic reviews to be published.
No, thank you, Bhavuk. Rehan, yes.
Just taking the discussion forward on what Bhavuk is saying and what Dr. Raju Vesh is saying, I think the methodology is very important in a systematic review, but more than that probably is the research question which you're trying to answer, right? Because finally, looking at it broadly, what is a systematic review doing? You are generating an evidence-based query and you're trying to get an answer to it, right? So the number of papers you may get, maybe 2, it may be 5, it may be 10, based on what your research question is. But probably if your research question is good enough and your methodology is good enough, then a systematic review will definitely be accepted. So I think when you plan a systematic review, deciding your research question based on the PICO format, which Bhavuk was talking of, is also very important.
Thank you, Rehan. Babu, taking the discussion forward, regarding the meta-analysis, you briefly touched on the meta-analysis. Now, various papers which have been published will have different ways of presentation the data. How are you going to extract that data to do your meta-analysis? Because that becomes a really difficult bit, because some will be using standard deviation, some will be using standard error or other parameters. So how are you going to take that data out? What's the message for authors?
So as I pointed out earlier also, that now we are progressing in the science of the meta-analysis also. So now we are talking about the meta-analysis which we call as the IMD meta-analysis. The IMD stands for the individual participant data or the individual patient data. So you ask for the raw data and then you analyze it with a new light system. You don't go to the previous authors. There could be biases involved in that, and then you do the analysis. So this is the raw data extraction is actually now the in thing for the good quality meta-analysis now.
Okay. Any of the panelists wants to add something on that?
Can I just make a suggestion for the listeners? And I think in the current day and age, as doctors, especially in our part of the subcontinent, don't get too much training on the statistical tools as such. And it's a really good idea to have a trained statistician in your team. Many libraries or librarians are able to provide that service in the NHS, but increasingly for the kind of complicated calculations required for our data extraction, it will be good to have a statistician on board to help with the paper.
Okay, thank you. I think Ashok has written something that, Ashok, you want to add that? Whether meta-analysis and systemic review were discussed part of quick publication?
So can I comment on that?
Yes.
So just trying to give you the editor's perspective on the reign of systematic reviews which is happening. Now, all the editorial platforms have this metric of we can look into the work of the author. So there is a link where we can click and we can see the contribution of the author and also look at the institute. So please remember, a systematic review or any such high-level research is expected that it comes from an area which is doing work in the same field. For example, somebody who is a knee surgeon and writes a systematic review of disc replacement. You see, are you getting me? So the systematic review is not something like you sit in the library and decide, "Okay, I start writing on this topic." The editor is going to look into who is writing it. Does he have some work already in this region? Is he an authority? Is the institute doing this work at all? So, getting me. Besides the systems which are attached to it, these things are being looked into. So there is a reason to it. The same knowledge two different experts cannot have. What Dr. Chabla will easily pick up about spine pathology, reading an article, a knee surgeon would not regarding the spine topic. So his analysis about the whole literature would be haywire. So you send it to an expert reviewer. The reviewer straight away finds out the flaw. So the rejection comes very fast. It is actually not being rejected straight away, but there are huge holes if you're not an expert in that field, and it's not coming from an institute which does lots of work related to that.
Thank you.
I agree with Dr. Lalit. Nowadays, more focus, unfortunately, shifting towards pen and table research than the clinical research involving the patient. So I'm sure that must be discouraged, and it'll see its time in future.
Sandeep, you wanted to come?
Yeah. As to the question as to how many studies should be there to do a systematic review or meta-analysis, I just want to bring it one thing. It's always a literature search. First, you identify the articles. If there are comparative studies comparing two treatment groups available with similar outcomes used, then we can go ahead with the meta-analysis. And again, the level of the meta-analysis can include only the RCTs, then the level of the meta-analysis is good. If the meta-analysis includes case control trials, then automatically the meta-analysis level is down. If you don't have a comparative parameters, then it's the systematic review. Sometimes there can be a combination also. Some parameters, it will be systematic review and meta-analysis. So a combination, when we have some certain parameters being compared, it will be, we can give the meta-analysis of that particular point of interest, and the rest part of the paper can be a systematic review. So it can be a combination as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Let's move to the next topic of Dr. Sham. Quite interesting topic of case reports. I think every one of us started from doing a case report first before we took up the academic career. A lot of things we mentioned, it's being rare, let's publish it. Is rarity the only thing we can get it published because it's never been reported? So let's publish it. So what are your thoughts? And I will ask all the panelists who haven't contributed to come and give their thoughts on this, because I think this is important. I think it's the key point is we just being it rare is not important, but important thing is we are taking a home message. What's the take-home message from this paper? Why are we reporting it? Mohit, you've been quiet. Do you want to add something?
I just want to make a comment on case reports.
Yes, Dr. Paul.
Yes, case reports and actually people are writing case reports. There should be some authenticity. Now a system should be generated like that. Lot of in case reports also I'm seeing that few fake cases are there. But there should be some authenticity behind these reports also. What system I have started in my department in our college, that we are asking the very intricate details of the patients, like his identity, his Aadhaar card, and lot of things. We should focus on the authenticity, and we should. I think we have seen lot of things, lot of cases. Even I have personally seen few case reports. They have added 55 cases, but authenticity is there. So I just wanted a review of people what they want to say regarding this. Apart from writing a good case report, what you're writing, what you're presenting, what you're submitting to the general, we should also focus on that point also.
Yeah,
I would ask the panelists to suggest, sometime you have 3 case reports or 5 case reports which do not actually qualify for a case series. So should they be only considered as case reports, or that's a gray area? Because many journals say that less than 10 cases are still case reports.
Dr. Bochu?
Yeah, it's a gray area. Generally, the way I look at it is if you have 3 cases, it's a case series. Anything less than 3 is a case report. And the other thing is, as once you start writing a case report, they should think about the journal, because most of the PubMed indexed journals which publish case reports, they will charge. And I strongly believe that that should not be the model that the person, because the author has put in the effort of writing the paper and they should not be charged for it. So whenever you write a paper, think about it. And on that point, I just want to so we did a study looking at how long does it take for an author to publish his first paper. And on an average, it takes about 8 years for an orthopedic surgeon, radiologist, or rheumatologist to publish their first paper. So don't worry if you have failures at the beginning. Everybody has gone through the same stage.
Point well made. I'm going to ask Rajiv to come in, and then Murali.
Yeah, so as regards Dr. Vaish's question about how many cases would be considered a case series and a case report, I think you look at the outcome, and if the outcome is going to be the same in, say, 3 cases or 4 cases, then it becomes a series. But if you're looking at it as a technical note, or if you're looking at it as a change in the way you approached a problem, then it will probably still be a case report. I think that's the way one would look at it.
Yes, Murali?
Of course. Series, absolutely. Absolutely.
I just want to make the point that these reports, we should focus, we should give us some time. As some people are writing case reports. Okay, this is the case and this is the follow-up. And it should have a long follow-up with a very good message. People are sending case reports to the general, where just they see the case and just put to the general, but without any long follow-up. So we cannot come to our discussions how many cases with a good follow-up and good results. So that it may help further.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Yeah.
Murali, you wanted to come in? Yes.
Yeah, but I would just like to slightly qualify to what Dr. C.P. Pal said. A good result as well as a bad result both make for case reports. Okay, that's one thing. The second misconception that we think is, that we must publish a case report as our first paper. A big misconception we often convey to our students. It's the wrong thing. It's the most difficult thing to get published. It may actually disillusion somebody from going ahead and publishing further papers. And third thing which I was trying to say was I like the way Sandeep spoke, though I disagreed in the beginning with his approach. But we should always remember there are many ways to skin a cat. So you could start at the beginning or you could start at the end. And the only one who can decide that is probably the author himself. So that's the way. But a very strong caution to all on the meeting, don't take the case report lightly. It's very tough. My longest has been 2.5 years to get my case report published. I didn't try too many case reports after that.
I agree. I think case reports are the most difficult to publish. The things you can add to the case report if you're giving a message is have a comprehensive literature review if the word count allows you, because some of the journals will have 1,500 word limit and something like that. If you add that, then it'll increase your citation factor later on if it gets published. So that's an important message as well. Can we carry on, Dr. Vaishya?
I think we should conclude now because we have another session.
Thank you all the best for the speakers. I think it was very good session.
Still, if there are any questions, you can write it in the dialogue box, chat box, and we can, then chat about it.
You can answer that in between the talk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit, for moderating this session so wonderfully well. And that will help the next moderator, Sasinder, also to increase his level. Now, the second session, the theme is that we cannot do without this. And the first speaker in this session is Dr. Karthik Vishwanathan, who is a professor of orthopedics at Baroda. And the moderator for this session is Dr. Sasinder. So Dr. Karthik will speak on the applied statistics, which is a difficult area for most orthopedic surgeons. So you will try to make it simple and understandable. Thank you, Dr. Karthik.
Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Karthik Vishwanathan. I'm going to present on applied statistics. I would like to thank Dr. Raju Vaishya sir and Dr. Lalit Mini sir for inviting me to present on this scientific writing workshop. There are two types of variables, numerical and categorical. Discrete are those where you can count, so such as number of days of hospitalization, number of blood transfusion. Continuous data mainly pertains to range of motion assessment or functional scores such as Harris-Hip score or Oxford-Hip score. Nominal category consists of, there is no ranking, so such as blood groups, type of hip prosthesis or nominal data. Ordinal category is for classification such as ASA grading, Gardens classification, or open fracture classification such as Testulo-Anderson classification. You have to form the research question first, depending on what you want to assess of any particular orthopedic condition. Then you need to choose the type of study that will best answer your question. Also, it is important to note that it should be feasible in your present workplace. Commonly, there are two types of hypothesis. Null hypothesis states that there is no difference between intervention A and intervention B. Alternate hypothesis can also be used sometimes. Most commonly used is two-sided, which says that either intervention A or intervention B will be better, or it could be one-sided, where it says only intervention A is going to be definitely better than intervention B. And that is very rare to use because before starting a study, you can not conclusively say that. If you have to state that, then there has to be a hypothesis, and also that you need to justify it. If you do a statistical test,
the results of the statistical tests are presented here, and then this is in reality. So if the test shows significant difference, and in reality there's a difference, then that is a true conclusion, correct conclusion. If the statistical test there's no difference, and in reality there is no difference, that is also correct. Okay. However, sometimes there can be type 1 error, which is false positive, and type 2 error, which is false negative error. In type 1 error, it happens due to multiple statistical tests being done. So if you do about 20 tests, then there is a 64% chance at least one test will be positive. Hence, whenever you're doing multiple testing, there has to be Bonferroni correction to account for the number of tests. Type 2 error deals with when you have an underpowered sample or a sample size is too small, that gives rise to type 2 error. So when we do a sample size calculation, the most important things to consider are power, which is usually set at 80%, alpha level, which is 0.05. You need to consider the the standard deviation of the outcome measure you're choosing. Also, you need to consider the minimal clinically important difference of that value. So this will all help you in formulating your sample size. So for example, most commonly people do thesis. It's a case series. So if you want to look at estimate the sample size for hemiarthroplasties for neck of femur, what you do is you go to the OT register and look for the total number of operations conducted in the orthopedic department. Then you estimate find the total number of hemiarthroplasties done. Then by this you can estimate the prevalence rate. In this case, 2.13. Then you put it into a software. AP-Info is a very good software which helps to calculate sample size and power. So you input these data here. Rest of them are fixed, and then you'll get, like, for 80% confidence level, you need a 14 sample size. For 95, you need 31. So accordingly, it helps to form your sample size. Then there is another thing. If you're comparing two groups, then we need to find the standard difference. And for various statistical tests, there are formula available. Then you use the LERS formula, where it is formed with the formula 16 divided by standard difference square, which gives you the sample size in each group. You can also use an Altman's nomogram, which has got on this side you have got the standard difference in various. You choose that, and then here you have got power. So you have to draw a line from. So I have chosen 0.9, and then you draw a line which goes to the power. So I wanted 0.80 as a power, and then you see where it is intersecting. This is the sample number of sample you need as per 0.05. So here it is coming to about 38. So that is how you practically use this. You have to do the sample size calculation early in the study. Then you also have to account for there may be patients lost to follow-up. So or attrition will be there. So you have to overestimate your sample size by at least 15 to 20%, only because if you have got more samples loss of patients, then the study doesn't become underpowered. The outcome measure you use should be valid and has to be highly responsive. Okay, then and the variability also should be low. So the choice of outcome measure is very important. The type of statistical test you are going to use depends on the type of variable, number of groups, whether you have got one group, two group, or three groups, the type of groups, and type of data distribution. Independent groups means patients have to are put into 2 or 3 groups and they are not related to each other. Dependent group means the same patient before intervention and after intervention you're measuring, so that is dependent group. Or you may also have an age and gender matched group. So these are all called as matched group or paired groups or independent or dependent groups. This is data distribution. You draw a histogram and then you superimpose a curve. Most of the statistical software will do this. So this is a bell-shaped curve. This is called normal distribution or Gaussian distribution. The one on the middle and the right, this is positively skewed data. This is a negatively skewed data. Both of them are not normally distributed. You can also use other coefficient like skewness coefficient. This is also calculated usually with the statistical software. If the value is between -1 and +1, that indicates it is normally distributed. Value less than -1 or more than 1 indicates it is asymmetrical. You can also use a Kolmogorov's Monod test or a Shapiroff-Wilk test. For sample size less than 50, Shapiroff-Wilk test is used. For sample size more than 50, you use a Kolmogorov's Monod test. If the test values are significant, then it indicates there is asymmetrical distribution. If it is normal, then it is not significant. Mean is the most commonly used central measure for symmetrical distributed data, and median is used for asymmetrical data. Standard deviation used for parametrical symmetrical data, and interquartile range for asymmetric data. It is important that standard deviation you measure it to 1 decimal point. So if you're using Harris-Hipp score, which is an integer, then you can maximum say 44.1 or something, but it should not be 2 or 3 decimals, like 44.567 or something like that should not be reported. That is too precise. So once that is decided, we have to choose parametric or non-parametric test. Parametric test is used for large sample size, normally distributed data. It is more powerful as compared to non-parametric test. Non-parametric test is used if you have a asymmetrical non-normal data, if sample size is less. So this is an important thing. So for normal distribution, you use mean and standard deviation and then do parametric test for inferential statistics. For non-normal data, numerical data, use median and interquartile range and non-parametric tests. This table shows various types of tests. Okay, for continuous and normal, depending on the number of groups and whether they are independent groups or paired groups, you use various types of statistical tests. This will all give rise to p-values and 95% confidence interval. 95% confidence interval is more easily given by parametric tests. So the p-value of 0.05 is arbitrary. Okay, so if the value is less than 0.001, it is extremely significant. Value between 0.001 to 0.01 is considered very significant. Okay, we also have to, when we interpret it, we have to make sure that it takes into account the 95% confidence interval. So the 95% confidence interval of difference in mean, median, and proportion. If the 95% confidence interval for the above contains 0, then it is not significant. If the 95% confidence interval doesn't contain 0, then it is significant. Similarly, for 95% confidence interval for odds ratio and risk ratio, if that interval contains 1, then it is not significant. If it doesn't contain 1, then it is significant. Width is important, like narrow interval, 95% confidence interval means more precise data. We also have to interpret not only the clinical significance, but also the not only the statistical significance, but also the clinical significance. So this is a hypothetical data. So 0 is no difference. And these blue lines are the minimal clinically important difference of the outcome. So the lines here is the lower and upper limit of 95% confidence interval. So in number 1, this is not significant clinically as well as statistically because the value is within the MCID. So this doesn't have any effect. Second is this is not statistically significant because crosses 0, but upper and lower limits are beyond the MCID levels. So the results are inconclusive, and we need further evidence to conclude about this. So for situation 3, this is not significant. Okay, because the 0 level, this is statistically significant because it doesn't cross the 0. And but this is within the MCID level. So we can say that the variable has small effect but not clinically significant. For 4, we can see that this is statistically significant because it doesn't touch 0, but some values are above the MCID levels. So a variable has small effect and may be clinically important. Well, situation 5, where all the values are above the MCID level, so this is statistically and clinically significant. So this has got an important effect. Okay, so this are a few tables. So you can see that not only the difference mean score is given, but also the 95% confidence interval and p-values. Both have to be given. This is another example as well. But here the relevance is Auspicious Disability Score, RMDQ, and SF12 MCS. All the scores are clinically important as well as statistically important because both of them are above the level of the MCID. Well, for SF12 MCS, though it is statistically significant, but not clinically because the values are less than the MCID levels. The cohort study we usually use to evaluate the prognosis and etiology. Relative risk is the commonly used statistic. If relative risk value of 1 indicates that the risk is the same in exposed and unexposed group. Relative risk more than 1 indicates that there is increased risk in exposed group. Relative risk less than 1 means there is reduction of risk in the exposed group. Okay. Case control study is a retrospective study, and the main statistic used is the odds ratio. So an odds ratio of 1 indicates that the exposure is not related to event. Odds ratio more than 1 indicates the exposure is positively associated with the event. an odds ratio less than 1 indicates the exposure is negatively associated with the event. We would need 95% confidence intervals also to be reported. So odds ratio is to be used to assess risk only if outcome is rare. Okay. So if you want to estimate, want to find out relation between two variables like modified Harris subscore and things, you can use a Pearson correlation coefficient or a Pearson or Spearman correlation coefficient. Pearson is the parametric component and it is used for numerical data which is normally distributed. Spearman correlation coefficient is used when both the numerical data are not normally distributed or one is numerical and other one is ordinal. So let me give a few examples. So the value ranges from -1 to +1. A value more than 0.5 is significant. Okay, and it also has to be accompanied by p-value. Correlation of value of R is 0 is that it means there's no correlation between the components. So here is an example. Okay, this is modified hip score and forgotten joint score. Both of them are normally distributed. So Pearson correlation coefficient has been used. This is a near perfect circle. You can correlation. This is R value was 0.92. Next is you want to look at how observers are looking at X-rays and they are able to look at classify various classification like Gardens classification or Satz's classification. So inter-rater agreement is for the same all the group measuring, looking at the X-rays and grading it at two different time frame. Usually between there is a 4-week gap. Intra-rater means this how well the same observer is able to agree with his own self or herself. So if the categorical data is there, for example, ASA for neck of femur Garden classification or Satz's classification, we use a kappa or a weight kappa level. So kappa value less than 0.20 is poor agreement. 0.41 to 0.60 is considered moderate agreement, and anything more than 0.80 is considered good agreement. So if you have to look at, if you're measuring continuous data such as scoliosis angle by Cobb's method or hallux valgus angle, then you use ICC value or intra-class correlation. So if the ICC value is 0, it means no agreement. ICC value of 1 is perfect agreement. ICC value of more than 75 is supposed to indicate excellent agreement between the observers. Another example. So you can see the p-values are significant and also the 95% confidence interval of the kappa value and the interpretation. You can see that the first reading and second reading. In the second reading, the kappa value increases significantly. Also, this is for slack wrist or scapholunate advanced collapse. Then you look at various stages, and you can see the maximum agreement amongst the observers is during for stage 3. So less agreement during stage 1 and 2. When you want to validate a study, we look at correlation. So there are the correlation between two scores like Harris hip score and the forgotten joint score. Convergent validity means again correlation amongst outcome measures which measure same domain. Divergent validity means there will be less correlation amongst outcome measures which measure dissimilar domains. For example, Harris hip score will have less correlation to SF36 or SF12. Reliability, two types of reliability are there. One is internal consistency, which is measured using Cronbach's alpha. Okay, it shows how good the correlation is there amongst various items of a questionnaire. So value more than 0.95 means probably 2 items are measuring the same domain. So that needs to be removed. Test-retest reliability is also measured. Responsiveness is measured using standard response mean, effect size, receiver area under curve, and MCID values. So this is an example of Liverpool elbow score where effect size and standard response mean based on various satisfaction levels is seen. So as the effect size in SRM increases as per the satisfaction of level of the patient. So this is a ROC curve showing area under curve of various outcome measures. You can see that the Roland Maris disability score and Oswestry disability index have got higher area under the curve as compared to other measures. The MCID value is also a component of responsiveness. The area which is on the ROC curve, the one which is closest to the top left corner, indicates it is significant. Regression studies are used when you want to measure association between variables, which more than 3 or 4 variables. So if you have got a numerical variable, then simple linear regression or multiple linear regression is checked. Regression is used for basically prediction. So if you have a numerical variable here as y, then you can this x can be either a numerical variable or a ordinal variable. Okay. Multiple linear regression is used mainly to look for confounding factors. Also, there can be multiple values which may be predicting a numerical variable, such as peak pressure, etc. Logistic regression is mainly used for data which is dichotomous, like union or non-union, alive or dead, infected, not infected. Similar regression. So the goals for if you want to compare a new test along with CT scan or anything which is a gold standard, then you look at prevalence, sensitivity, and specificity. So for a condition which is easily treatable, sensitivity is important. But for a condition which is less easily treated than or very difficult diagnosis and untreatable condition, then you use specificity. For us as clinicians, positive predictive value and negative predictive value is more important. Survivorship analysis is done using Kaplan-Meier analysis. Okay, two different groups have been compared: patients with osteosarcoma and their survival without pathological fracture is the top one. The one below is those with fracture. Okay, so the survival rate amongst osteosarcoma patients is higher with patients who do not have a fracture. So this comparison has been done by log rank test, which is a non-parametric test. The p-value is 0.02, hence significant. When we do a meta-analysis, is another type of study which is important. We have to choose the effect size statistics. So if it is a binary endpoint, we use relative risk. If it is continuous data, we use mean or standard deviation. We also have to look for heterogeneity. So if the heterogeneity is less than 25%, we use a fixed effect model. If it is more than 25%, we use a random effect model. And when we compare, basically for the statistical test for pooling, if all the outcomes are similar, such as if all the studies have used Harris-Hip score, then you use something called as a weighted mean difference. However, if some studies have used Harris-Hip score, some have used Oxford-Hip score, you will use something called as a standardized mean difference, which will account the discrepancies. We also have to look for heterogeneity. So if the heterogeneity is less than 25%, it is low. If it is more than 50% and less than 75, it is moderate. And if it is more than 75, it is significant heterogeneity. You have to find out the cause for the heterogeneity. Publication bias is assessed using, this is a curve which shows significant difference, and there is a forest plot. In the funnel plot, it has to be symmetrical with equal distribution. So this is minimal bias. Here there is significant bias because this part is missing. So there is significant publication bias. Okay. So in conclusion, when we do a statistical test, when you plan it, choosing the right test is important, because if you do not do it properly, then it is going to jeopardize the internal validity of the study, giving rise to bias. So do it before you recruit the patients. Formulate all the hypothesis should be formed before the test. Choose the correct statistical test. Always quote p-value and the 95% confidence interval, and always comment on whether the data is clinically significant as well, in addition to statistical significance. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Karthik. You have given a very elaborate account of all the statistics, models, and applications that are used in research and publication. But for orthopedic surgeon, it may be too complex. So in the panel discussion, you should highlight what are the top 5 statistical tools that are used commonly by the orthopedic surgeons, and they must know their indication and how to use it. That we'll discuss it later on. Now, the next 2 talks are very interesting. One is on the tables and another one is on the figures. I love these 2 things because in most of my papers, I would like to include as many tables and figures as possible to represent my data, because that gives a very clear impact on the readers and the editors, but also it gives me a lot of space to write in the discussion. And because of the word limit, sometimes if you flood your manuscript with this data, then you don't have enough space to write the discussion, which I feel should be the core of your paper, which should include about at least 40 to 50% of the word count. So without much ado, first I would invite Dr. Srinivas to speak on the tables. and he will tell us the different types of tables that can be made, what are the usefulness and the problems associated with them. Over to Sri.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Srinivas Kamampati. I'm an associate editor for IGO, Jcot, and JASSM. I would like to thank Professor Maini and Professor Vaishya for this opportunity. And my charge here is to talk on tables for scientific manuscripts. So let's address this topic by using the traditional list of queries, namely what, why, when, where, and how. So what is a table? The word table is derived from Old English table, which is derived from the Latin word tabula, meaning a board, plank, flat top piece. Its current spelling reflects the influence of the French tableau. It is a two-dimensional data structure that organizes information into rows and columns. It can be used to both store and display data in a structured format. Let's look into the anatomy of the table. Parts of the table are given here. The title helps the reader understand what information is recorded. It is advisable to give the variables in the title. And columns are vertical divisions and rows are horizontal divisions. First row usually has column headings, and column headings are the variables presented. The independent variable is usually placed on the left-hand side column and presented in an ascending or descending order based on one or many of the dependent variables that are placed on the right of the independent variable. Units of measurement should be mentioned in the column heading to avoid repetition. Footnote gives instructions that help in reading the table. Data can be presented under subheadings, nested headings. Totals can be presented as a whole or among groups as subtotal. Tables in manuscripts are different from those in Excel and Access because the data can be analyzed further in these softwares, whereas that presented in the manuscript is usually a product or the end result of that analysis, highlighting the findings and certain aspects to the readers. So the difference between a manuscript table and Office software table I've summarized here. For a table in the manuscript, the rows are of limited number, usually restricted to one page maximum, whereas in Excel and Access, it's unlimited, sometimes going up to thousands and millions of rows. For columns, it's the same, limited number, restricted to one page. For the softwares, there can be multiple columns. Analysis is usually by visual in table manuscripts, whereas further analysis can be done by sorting, filtering, pivoting, or relational fields or calculated fields in the softwares. Automatic calculations or calculated fields are not possible in a table manuscript, whereas it's possible in Excel and Access. Presenting unrelated data is possible in manuscript, whereas it's not possible in Excel and Access because they're usually constrained by some rules. Customized presentation, again, is possible in a manuscript, whereas in the softwares, these are constrained by rules defined while forming the tables. Why do we use tables? We use tables to summarize data, commonly to present demographic data. Tables are used to present data in a concise form in a manuscript. When chosen and presented well, they save space and give the reader information packed for visual analysis by themselves. They give structure to data that can be presented in a readable form. They can be structured and presented to readers to identify patterns and relationships in a data. There are three aspects of a table: the content as to what should go into the table, The format of the table, this usually can be got from the author instructions of the journal. Where do we place the table? Usually it's next or after the relevant text in the main manuscript, or at the end of the manuscript, or as a separate Word file containing all tables, or one file for each table, depending on what the journal instructions tell us to do. Each journal has their own instructions on how we format tables. So how do we create tables? The most common way is to copy from Excel and paste it on the Word file. You can also create a table in Word. We have a short video on how to create table and the multiple options available to format the table in Word document. Just try and start the video here. So you could choose the number of columns and rows to be inserted by selecting as shown. There are two options here, insert table and draw table. Insert table is used to insert the table. Instead of selecting like this, it gives options of number of columns and rows. Supposing you have number of rows that you want more number of rows that are depicted here, you can use this insert table option to create more rows and columns. Draw table is used to draw a table the way you want it. It's an interesting option. I would recommend you to try it out, and it's useful when you want to merge a few cells in the header rows. When you press the tabs, the tabs progress in the order you make the cells. Once you place the table, you can choose the style of your table by picking from the style formats as shown there. You can select the alternate row coloring, which is useful. That's coloring for the cells, and that is for making borders. By selecting border, you can create a border for a single cell, single side, or the whole table. All options are given here. By pressing the plus mark, you can select the whole table and format the whole table the way you want. I have pasted a sample table here, selected the whole table and selected the style for it. You can move the table by hand to place the page in the page, or by selecting options in the design. You will select the table by either clicking the plus or by clicking inside one of the cells. You can see options on the left side that are ticked over here. We will come to that shortly. So these are the options on this side. These are header row. So if you click on the header row, it formats the header row in a particular way. First column, it formats only the first column. The total row, the last column formats the last column. Total row is usually at the bottom here, formats the total row. Banded rows, it creates bands for the rows, and banded columns, it creates bands for the columns. Banded rows is more recommended than creating banded columns. So you can see the options under the draw table. Insert option has inserting rows or column at a specific place, deleting row or column for a specific place under the delete option, selecting cell, row, or a column under the select option, split cells, splits the cells, and split table, splits the table in a specified place. So auto fit and distribute is a useful option to fit your table in a page. The table may be fit to contents or fit to window, or you can use fixed column widths for each of the columns. The other options are to distribute rows evenly or columns evenly. Convert option over here can convert text or table text to table or table to text. If you format it in a particular way, text to a table. Next option is table properties. Come to that shortly. So it's at the bottom here. So here you can set the properties for a table, for a row, for a column, for a cell. And these are our options available under each heading. And you can place a title here. So what are the rules for tables? Is the table really needed? You need to decide whether you want to put the table or not, get the parts of the table right, make sure numbers add up. Do not give large data tables, split to different tables if possible. So clear and relevant data is required. Use figure where possible in place of table. Get the units, decimals of the values right, and appropriate bits of columns and space for the rows. Formatting should be simple, clear, neat, no clutter of numbers. Vertical lines are usually not recommended because the natural reading style is horizontal. And that's why horizontal banding is more recommended than banding of the columns. The do's for the table, legend, sometimes called the caption, goes above the table. Units are specified in the column headings wherever possible. Lines of demarcation are used to set legend, headers, data, footnotes. They should be set apart from one another when you are designing the table. Footnotes are used to clarify points in the table or to convey repetitive information about entries. Footnotes may also be used to denote statistical differences among groups. All tables given at the end of manuscript or in a separate page. That's based on journal instructions. If references are to be used in the table using a reference manager, it's advisable to use the table at the preferred location to get your references numbering right, and then shift the table out of the manuscript once you get the numbers right. Most common use of the table is for demographic data of the study population. While presenting table from published paper, get permission to reproduce and stick to formatting rules recommended for journal. Give list of tables at the end of manuscript and indicate in text where each of the tables are to be placed. The don'ts: do not use too many colors, no decoration, too many subtotals are to be avoided. Do not forget to cite tables in the text, and do not repeat numbers in the table that are given in the table in the text also. Common errors that we see when we are dealing with manuscripts related to the tables are the tables may not be labeled, they may not be cited in the text, they are repeating numbers in the text. Too many tables, usually less than 7 are recommended, including the figures, or the tables are too big, too much information. Numbers are not adding up. When you add up the numbers of the totals or the percentages, they don't add up. Units are not given or missing from the column heading. Abbreviations are not expanded in the footnotes. I've given the journal instructions here for the Indian Journal of Orthopaedics. These are the instructions for the table. So all tables are to be numbered using Arabic numerals, and tables should always be cited in the text in the consecutive numerical order. For each table, you should supply the table caption. We have gone that before, explaining the components of the table, identify any previously published material by giving the original source in the form of a reference at the end of the table. Footnotes to table should be indicated by superscript, lowercase letters, and included beneath the table body. Tables should be given as supplementary material for IJO. For Jcot, the instructions are they should be submitted as editable text and not as images. So that's important. tables can be placed either next to the relevant text or on separate pages. So there is an option here. You can do any way you want. Number tables consecutively in order with their appearance in the text, and place any table notes below the body. And be sparing in the use of tables. Ensure that data presented in them do not duplicate elsewhere in the article. So we have seen this instruction repeat. So that's very important. Do not repeat information. Please avoid using vertical rules, shading in table cells. So to summarize, tables are useful tools to convey data and information in manuscripts. They have a big impact on quality of the manuscript if used optimally. And you should get the rules of the tables right, get the do's and don'ts of the table right. And it's useful to know the features in the Microsoft Word on how to create and present tables and to format the tables. Always check journal instructions before submission of the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri, for your wonderful talk. And actually, I have been using tables for many years, but I did not know that there are so many applications that are available on MS Word. Thank you for enlightening this, and I will try to use this. And we'll take further questions during the panel discussion. The next speaker is Dr. Murli Podwal from Mumbai. Dr. Murli, as you know, is associated with research and publication and is one of the main pillars of Indian Journal of Orthopaedic editorial board. And he would enlighten us with the figures, the ins and outs of figures that we use for our research papers. So over to Murli, please.
Good morning, and I would like to start by thanking the Delhi Orthopaedic Association, the Indian Journal of Orthopaedics, and the Jcot for inviting me onto this forum once again. I'll be speaking to you about illustrations or the visual elements of your display in your paper. These visual elements, as I would like to call them, are a snapshot of the research that you are presenting. They present the salient findings for ready reference. They are a clear and precise elucidation of your results, and they are an understandable presentation of sizable numerical and statistical data which you may not be able to represent so well in the text, and helps to actually complement the text. It's an extremely useful tool for editors, reviewers, and readers for the first glance to understand the relevance of the manuscript and the relevance of your research. So why do we need illustrations? We depict complex relationships, statistics. We demonstrate clinical examples, surgical techniques, representative success and results. I'll give you some examples of these through some of the papers we have published. We tend to describe certain design concepts and diagrams, workflow illustrations, and very importantly, to describe a research protocol, such as systematic reviews, meta-analysis in randomized controlled trials and in other studies. It's a single point of reference where we understand how the research has been conducted. So what can you use? You can use tables, you can use figures, and you can use data in other forms. So we use a table mainly for precise numerical values and other specific data. I think Srinivas has already covered it. We use figures to show trends, patterns, and relationships across and between data sets, to summarize research results, and a visual explanation of a sequence of events. Text is only when you don't have extensive or complicated data to present. And when you put your data into a table and you have only two or less than two columns, then you prefer to use text. So depending on what you want to present, you have to choose your visual element. So consider the following questions, and this is from the author and review tutorials on Springer. Are there any data that readers might rather see as a display item? Do your figures supplement the text without repetition? You don't want to write about it as well as put it on a table. That is unnecessary repetition, but there should be a complementary way of using both of them. Have you put data into a table that could be better explained in the text? such as simple statistics or p-values. So just ask yourself a few questions before you decide what are the visual elements you want to put into your paper. Tables have been covered already by Srinivas. I would just like to, just summarize over here that be careful about your legend and caption. They should be clear and concise. Divide them into categories. Give sufficient spacing between the columns and rows. Don't forget the units and give, good legible font type and size. So this is an example from a paper that we published sometime last year on shoulder function assessment. So this shows a very nicely represented table where you can see the precision and the recall with respect to the different motions. It is a single point of reference which we can use. And it also gives an idea of how useful the system can be. The first table in that very same paper actually estimated the range of motion accuracy using different methods. And it talks about flexion, abduction, extension at different degrees at which we measured it, what were the error in degrees of that, and what the root mean square error. So this is the way that I would like a table to be represented when a research is presented to me. So what are the different types of figures you can use? You can use images, data plots, maps, schematics, and all should be like a table with a clear and concise legend and caption to accompany them and linking them to the paper. Now, images typically help the readers visualize the information that you are trying to convey. And it's very necessary for the accuracy of a scientific manuscript. So include scale bars, label important items, indicate the meanings of different colors and symbols used, give a suitable description and link to the text, and ensure good contrast in the colors in the images that are drawn. So don't use colors which are not contrasting very well. It doesn't help. For X-ray images, especially, most of the journals will allow you to, upload them in a sequence, but you must ensure correct sequence, clarity, and labeling. Data plots are relatively more difficult to read. Many of us just skip them, but they are used to show functional or statistical relationship between two or more items. So here, individual data points are often omitted. You don't need to give the values for individual data point, but then you show them across the axis and depict the relationship. So label the axis, specify units for quantities, label the curves and data sets, and use a legible font size. Now from the same paper, I'm showing you an illustration of Bland-Altman plots for the angles measured for goniometer against a smartwatch. So this helps me to understand the distribution of the values across the lines which have been labeled. Now let's forget about what this means, but see the way that this has been depicted with labeling of the axes and the lines within the plot itself. And there is a clear description in very legible font. So this is what I want to convey here. So you have a caption, you have legible font, you have clear labels, and this is all that is essential for most data plots. Schematics help identify the key parts to a system or process. Now they should highlight only the key elements. Well, don't try to put too many things there, make them extremely complicated. When you do that, you end up cluttering your image, and your reader might simply skip it. And so the value that you want from the schematic will not be there. So it not only includes the drawings that the author chooses, offering a degree of flexibility, which is not there in an image. So a schematic is good. For schematics, again, label and give complementary explanations in the caption as well as in the main text. Flow diagrams are very common illustrations that we use to illustrate the flow of a procedure, a diagnostic test, or a research procedure. It's also important to illustrate research protocols. A well-constructed flow diagram will speak more than the entire materials and methods put together. And it is very essential part of the paper. We would not accept a paper which is an RCT, interventional study, or a systematic review without a flow diagram. Now here is an example of a schematic on the left from the very same paper. I'm picking it up, where there's a schematic of how data is collected from a wrist wearable, transferred through an intermediate sensor log to a cloud, and there is a process of analysis of this whole thing during the process of detecting that particular motion of the shoulder. A flow chart here is describing the algorithm flow, which describes exactly how the signals are processed, and one gets a classification of that particular motion. So this is the way that one can use a schematic or a flow chart or a table and a data plot within the same paper to bring values to that paper. Avoid manipulating images. Now there is this something that everybody will talk about. Do not adjust brightness or contrast. Do not crop out unnecessary parts. Sometimes you crop out necessary parts and you do not crop out the name of the patient. So be careful when you are cropping your images. Relevant parts should be left behind, irrelevant parts should be removed out, and there should be some kind of consistency across the whole thing. And you keep the original with you. If asked for, you should be able to provide it. Don't recolor images. Don't change the orientation of the images in such a way that they become undecipherable. Right to left, left to right. Keep the orientation right, the way that we normally do in clinical practice. Remove patient identifiers, please. In all clinical data, in all X-ray images, CT images, there should be no patient identifiers. This is something that a lot of us just completely forget to do. Now here is an example of an illustration that talks about the evolution of artificial intelligence. Now, this is such a simple diagram which tells you how AI has moved from reactive machine and will move to self-aware machine. Then what are the typical characteristics of each of these? So this is a kind of diagram which generally tends to grab attention and helps you understand without actually need to refer to the text. An example of a flow diagram in robotics. So this tends to describe what is common in the flow in navigation and what is different in robotics, and helps the reader understand as to what are the specific steps which are there. Well, this may not be all inclusive, but tends to be a good reference to how robotics brings value. Now, this is an example of how you can use a collage of images to describe a surgical flow. Here, in this case, it are the different steps of robotic surgery in total knee arthroplasty. So these complement the text and help the reader understand the text better. Another paper from where I am picking up a variety of illustrations to help you understand how to use your visual elements. On the left is a schematic. This is a paper on simulation of a single leg drop jump activity and using a neuromuscular controller to predict the muscle co-activation. So on the left, you are finding a schematic which shows an OpenSim model on which a single leg drop jump activity is being simulated. And if you look at it, there is an inset which shows the specific positioning of the ligaments and muscles, because that is not very clear in the whole body figure. So this schematic is a good ready reference to the main text. Now, if you look at the table, it describes individual muscles. It shows the activation parameters very clearly. Again, complementary to the main text. A bar chart shows variation in muscle activation. So you can understand if you look at the name of the muscle as well as the height of the bar chart as to the extent of activation that has occurred using the drop jump activity. And again, a flow chart at the bottom, which shows the predict adapt model to predict and adapt to injury conditions. So a variety of illustrations have been used over here, and these all complement the main text and add to the value of the main text. This is an example of using a bar chart here for showing the distribution of data in a data set. So this was a paper on sepsis prediction on a challenge data set, and on the right is a flow chart which shows the way that this algorithm works and how the data has been used to predict sepsis in a given data set. So again, the use of the appropriate illustrations is what makes the paper better. Now, this is another way, an example more towards orthopedics here, where we had published the surgical technique for biological plating of subtrochanteric fracture. This was a pretty old paper back in 2002, but it's a classic example of how we had provided line drawings to the journal, and the journal had then adapted the line drawings to illustrate step by step the surgical technique in using a 95-degree DCS for biological plating of a subtrochanteric fracture. So this is an example of surgical steps being illustrated with appropriate diagrams, appropriate legends, clear and concise. And look at the way that the X-ray images have been depicted. There's a pre-op, there's the immediate post-op, and there is a picture of union with an appropriate legend saying figures 7A to 7C and the details of the figures. So this is how we expect you to actually, label your figures. Now, these are just examples to give you an idea of how you should be thinking, and you should start thinking at the very start of your paper how you're going to be doing this. And as you build up your paper, you put in the appropriate illustrations and the appropriate figures, the appropriate schematics, the appropriate tables, and thus make your paper good. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Murli, for your elaborate talk on the figures. Just a small tip to the audience. MS Word actually can give you lots of ideas for the figures by simply putting your data into the tables, and then you can choose which figure is most suitable for your article, and that can be used. We'll have more discussion at the end. So we are coming now to the last presentation, and that happened to be mine. And basically, it answers the question why, which most of the clinicians ask themselves, why should I publish and where should I publish? What are the reasons for me to publish? Why should I spend my time and effort to do so? So my presentation will address these issues. Over to you, please. Good afternoon. I welcome you all to this fifth course of Jcot with IGO on research and publication. I would be speaking on why and where to publish. It's a famous saying that if you do not publish, you perish. But I would say that nowadays, if you publish, you can prosper. So it is very important that you think about publishing your research in future. Why publish is a very big question, which most of the clinicians ask in their mind. Publishing is important because writing a scientific article is one of the major and final product of all scientists, and the highest value of a research is reached when the scientific information is published as a material and become a part of the world fund of knowledge. There are several advantages of publications. It gives you personal pleasure and sense of satisfaction and achievement. It provides an additional line to the CV, which is very important for younger generation of people. It helps to share ideas and results with the colleagues, and it leaves a record of your research which can be added to by others in future. It also gets your name in that field of research and build your academic reputation. It may help also your institution in improving its ranking, and it's overall an important career step for you. But research is usually considered repulsive by most clinicians, but once a research is published, by any clinician, then publication becomes addictive, and they would like to have more and more publication in future. And hence, you must try to do a couple of publications, and then you see how you become addictive to it. There are, however, several barriers to publication, and the most important, most common is the mindset. Most clinicians feel that it is not my cup of tea because I'm short of time because of my practice. There may be language-related barriers that springs to mind and that they stop writing. It is hard for most clinicians to communicate your scientific ideas and work to your peers and other people, because it opens you up for potential criticism, which is difficult to accept by most of us. But also, there are advancement in research methodology, so simple research or basic research is not getting published so easily these days in the journal, and more complex research like RCTs and meta-analysis are more commonly published. Writing is difficult because there may be language barriers, and one is not used to writing scientific knowledge that they may have so easily. But not only writing is a skill, but getting published is also a skill, and not all writers are always published. The rejection rate in most journals is around 80 to 90%. The research that you are trying to publish may not have a new or sufficient scientific interest for a good journal, and experiments do not always work. However, it has been seen that until recently, positive results were easier to publish, but now it is a common practice to see that a lot of researchers are publishing their negative results also in the journal, and editors and reviewers actually acknowledge any negative results that may be associated with your research. So don't be afraid of sending any negative results for publication. Several journals have specific requirements which may be difficult to meet by individual authors, may be another cause of not getting published. But there are several tips and tricks that I would give for clinicians to publish. And the first and foremost is that one should develop an aptitude and passion for research and publication. You must also learn to identify your jewels. By that I mean what may seem to be rare to you may actually be rare for the world. So if in your practice of 25, 30 years, if you have come across with a complex case or a rare case that you have not seen before, read about it, then it may be rare actually, and then you must investigate, and if that's so, then you can send it for publication as a case report or case series and so on. You should develop the habit of reading regularly, and the easiest way I find is to enroll with various journals for their table of content to be sent to you on each publication through email, and that helps you to develop interest and be aware of what's being published in the recent past, and then you can choose some of the topics of your interest to read in more details. Those who are new in the field of research and publication should find a mentor to help you and guide in research and publication. There are several reviewers and editors that you can contact for help. one must know what is a strong manuscript and should try to make the manuscript accordingly. It should have a novel idea with a clear message which is useful and exciting for the readers. It should be presented and constructed in a logical manner as per journal requirements. The reviewers and editors should be able to grasp the scientific significance of your research easily, because research, the reviewers and editors are all busy people and they have to understand the concept and the contents of your research quickly to make an early decision. There are several journals available where you can send your research, and finding a suitable journal is also an important part of publication. It is based on the theme of your paper and the contents of your paper. You should also consider the audience and readership that you are aiming for, and also the quality and the reputation of the journal in which you are likely to send your journal by its impact factor and H index. And there are several now online help that is available in the form of Journal Finder and Suggester, which is available on publishers' website like Springer, Elsevier, and so on. That helps you in finding suitable journal. If you put keywords and abstract in that format, the Journal Finder will suggest a dozen of journals for your article. So the clinical practice and research and publication should go hand in hand, and you should make it a habit to have good record of your cases maintained in a suitable manner. You should follow good clinical practice guidelines. You should incorporate research tool in your practice so that by scoring in different ways, so that in future, if you want to do any research and publication, it can be done easily. Every researcher has a career graph in their research and publication. Initially, you do research. This is my career graph. Initially, you do research because it is obligatory to get good jobs soon after your postgraduate examinations. And you do some research, then you go into practice, and you do not have adequate number of patients or time because of practice, then the research goes to halt. And then once you are well established and have sufficient number of cases and experience, you start to write, and then you achieve a maximum once you are well established in your career. So there are several motivations for publication. It gives you fame, it gives you recognition by your peers. Some people can make fortune out of their research because of getting promotions, grant, application, research funding. But more than financial gains, it is also your responsibility to the society as a taxpayer-funded research to help contribute to the progress of the science in the form of better treatment options through your research for the present and future patients. But most clinicians have this problem that they do not want to learn new things because they are quite happy what they have already learned. And the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but it is the illusion of knowledge. So if you want to learn newer things, you must first unlearn what you have already learned and then relearn new things. And that's how you can improve on your experience and learn newer things. There are several pitfalls in regarding research and publication because it takes time. But I must tell you, it gets easier with the practice. And if you publish a couple of papers, then the future ones are easier to publish and write. So don't wait any longer and start writing the paper that is in your mind, because then you can do it quite easily. So to conclude, I would say that balancing clinical practice and research should be done. Publication is an art, and that needs to be cultivated individually and comes as you start publishing a few papers. The clinical practice is best coupled with research and publication. And research has not only become an optional thing now, it is mandatory or obligatory for most of us to enhance in our professional career and promotions. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you all for listening to these lectures. Now we are coming to the end of our seminar, and we will have a very exciting last session on panel discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Sasinder, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon from South India, but now practicing in Oman in Apollo Hospital. Sasinder is also a great researcher and has published many papers. So, and we have very knowledgeable and researchers and on the panel, and I will hand over to Sasinder to introduce them and to take the this session for panel discussion.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Professor Vaishya, and thank you to the whole team. Thank you, Lalit Maini. It's a great privilege for me to be moderating session of the JCOT IJO Scientific Writing Media Program. Thank you for the wonderful opportunity. We have a very learned moderators, panelists here. Dr. Hitesh Lal, who is of orthopedics at VMMC and Sports Injury Center. Dr. Rehan Ul Haq, orthopedics professor and HOD orthopedics AIMS Bhopal. Dr. Chandra Prakash Pal, professor and head SN Medical College, Agra. Dr. KP Iyengar of orthopedics Hospital, Amskirk, UK. Dr. Vijay Kumar Jain, Associate Professor of Orthopedics, Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital, New Delhi. And Dr. Ashish Gulia, Professor Orthopedic Oncology, Department of Surgical Oncology, Tata Memorial Center, Mumbai. So, thank you very much for the panelists for being around for the discussion. We have a lot of questions piled up for all the speakers. So first, going on to Dr. Karthik Krishna's presentation, I'd like to make a couple of initiating questions. Dr. Karthik, do you think the presence of a statistician is a must for studies? We have already discussed on this earlier, but I would like to stress out the point. Does the presence of a statistician gauge the value of the study or alter the chances of publication?
Okay, thanks for your question. I do not think a statistician is essential. It is not mandatory. I have not come across any. There are a few studies where we have to take help of a statistician, but by and large, it depends on how comfortable you are with the basic statistics and advanced statistics. Many times you find that people who are from a statistical background, they may not be able to understand the basic knowledge is going to many things. So I personally, but not for all papers.
Okay, thank you very much. And you rightly pointed out that in the take-home message that everyone should know what right tests have to be used for the study. So I would also like to add on that in addition to the right test, you have to know what adequate corrections have to be made on the test. For example, you pointed out that Bonferroni correction has to be done whenever too many tests are being done on a particular set of data. So that is one thing. And I also found in a lot of studies during my peer reviewing process or editing process that sometimes when you are studying a parameter that could collectively affect a particular variable, the author has not made it a point to use a regression analysis. So have you seen this in your experience? This question is for Dr. Karthik Krishnath and also for the panel. Kindly share experience. Have you seen misuse or non-use of these tests when it is actually needed?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I do have come across whenever I have evaluated postgraduate thesis, as well as when I review for the journals in various capacity as an associate editor, as well as during the reviewing for the journal. I do come across. So the most common error where I feel is when there are multiple risk factors, people try to use something like a chi-square test to say, look, there is a significance. There is probably more number of patients in a certain group, but a chi-square test only tells about the significance. It does not establish a cause and effect relationship. Now, there are 3-4 things which are required for a cause and effect relationship. The most important thing is if you feel there are about 2 or 3 factors which are going to have an impact on the outcome, such as, if you want to find out what are the predictors or what are the risk factors for patient dissatisfaction after a total hip replacement, or what is the risk factor of a patient having septic arthritis of the hip. In those cases, you need something like a regression analysis because there are multiple factors. It could be age, it could be gender, it could be the time of presentation to the hospital, and so many things. So regression analysis would play a key role in such a situation. So rather than just relying on sort of a chi-square test and pass it off as saying, like, look, this is a significant association and this is a risk factor, that is misinterpretation. So that is the key point, I think, which I come across various reviews.
The panelists, can you share your experience on this?
Yeah. Can I speak here?
Yes, sir, please.
Just taking on what Dr. Karthik is saying, I just want to add on 2 things. As an orthopedic surgeon with limited knowledge of statistics, I think working in a medical college environment where most of the publications are coming out of the postgraduate thesis, I think it is a good idea to involve a statistician as early as possible as far as a person like me is concerned, right? So it all depends upon what your comfort level is. And the thing is, most of the times you will find that once a paper has been done, the single most important reason why it is being rejected is because a statistician was not involved from day one, and then you have an inadequate sample size, or you have done an analysis which actually is not correct, right? So for somebody like me, I would like to involve a statistician as early as possible. The other important comment I would like to make here is about what we were talking of regression analysis. Another common thing which I have seen in most of the papers is a subgroup analysis, right? So a sample size has been calculated, say for Harris-Hip score, and that is your primary outcome measure. You have seen 80 patients, but just because the student or his guide or the researcher is not aware, he will divide them into 10 different groups, males versus females, 20 to 30 years versus 30 to 40 years, and then all these subgroups will have just 10 to 5 patients. And then you're going to do a subgroup analysis saying that Harris-Hip score is better in patients who are 20 to 30 years of age as compared to 30 to 40 years of age because I found a p-value which is less than 0.05. So that is a very common mistake for those papers which are from a thesis point of view are getting converted and coming to IG or any journal. So I think that is a very important key take-home message which everyone should understand, that a subgroup analysis is always underpowered unless and until you have not done that at your initial stage.
If I may, Shashinder.
Can I make comment?
Yeah.
Shashinder, can I go ahead or?
Yes, sir. Dr. Murali, please.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. I think there is this involvement of a statistician is a catch-20 situation. Damn it if you do, damn it if you don't. So that's the way I look at it. So none of us are absolute mathematicians, or we would have landed up in the US with an engineering degree in our pocket sitting somewhere. So we came here predominantly because we didn't want to do mathematics. So now when we look at it, a statistician is a necessity, but unless you yourself can see whether he's doing well, whether he's advising you correctly, you cannot make absolute use of it. So for me, a statistician is a tool. He's the guy who's going to advise me, but I must know whether he's advising me correctly or not. So I have to use him correctly. So it's somewhere a kind of a middle path which you need to tread. And this overuse of statistics is pretty common. I think Rehan already spoke about that, so I don't want to repeat it, but that was the second point which I wanted to make. Just because you don't have to quote too many statistics. You just have to have the right amount of statistics, not too many, not too less. And that comes out of reading some papers, number two, and also from doing a few research studies. You come out of that. And the medical college statisticians usually have a stock paragraph for all the thesis. So they give you the same stock paragraph. So that is not a guide in any way at all.
I have a comment.
Usually we have a statistician, part-time statistician in our hospital, but I have seen the major problem that they face is we are unable to pose right questions to them. We say, this is the data, can you make some statistical analysis out of it? They don't know what is this material, what is the objective of the study, and so on. So first we have to be clear what we want to derive from our data, and then the statisticians can help.
I always force my PGs to seek advice of a statistician right from the beginning of their thesis course, and I always tell them, just make a statistician understand what exactly you want. Because if you give good data, if you give good statistics, there will be a high chance of publication of your paper. This is my opinion.
Yeah, wonderful points. I just want to quote my professor, Dr. Jagdish Menon, and a good friend of Dr. Murli also. He used to say, you put crap inside statistics, you will get out crap. So first of all, we need to know what exactly we need to put inside, and what is the goal. Is there a logic in what we are trying to do? So it is very, very necessary to get the statistician informed of this. However, we might not be expert in everything. So it is always the best idea to get a statistician's help, because he will definitely know more what we think that he knows. Okay, Dr. Sandeep.
Yeah, again, carrying the same thing forward, there are two aspects into it. One is, yes, we should include a statistician, but it's always incomplete before we as an orthopedic surgeon has not done relevant work on the background. To cite this example, suppose we are doing a study on knee osteoarthritis or hip, be it a Harris hip score or be it a WOMAC scoring. We should go back into the publications which have used it and what way they have derived at their data from good journals, because the statistician, they deal XYZ, they come up, but until unless we particularly tell them, okay, this is the problem, they cannot analyze and give it us the way what we want. That also holds true for the illustrations and the graphs they give. We will have to point out, we will have to ask them actually. So it's actually a two-way. If you're not good at doing statistics, it's okay, but hire them, but you go well prepared. How much we ask, it's like, give and take. We ask this much, they will give you that, because we don't expect them to be a full-time orthopedic related statistician. So we have to do our homework and then go to them.
Dr. Ambani.
Yeah, I think the key bit is we as authors and researchers should have a baseline knowledge of statistics. If we don't have that knowledge, we will end up messing up the methodology. And the statistician is only required to give us the results, but we need to plan that. And if we are asking statisticians to plan, then there's something wrong. So we need to have a baseline knowledge of statistics. We're not asking us to do complex analysis. That is fine. We can use statisticians for that, but we need to have the baseline knowledge to get what we want to achieve from that paper.
Okay. This question is for the panelists. As editors of major journals, can you... Yeah, Dr. Karthik, please.
Can I just add in?
Please go ahead.
So it is, there are two, I would agree with most of the panelists. as I said, we need a baseline knowledge of statistics, because you're the person who are going to formulate the question. And depending on the type of question, what do you want to study? Are you wanting to study about risk factors? Are you wanting to study about the efficacy of an intervention, or what? The research question is to be based by us, and then you choose the type of study, and then with basic, statistical knowledge of what you want to do, then you can go to the statistician. Because most of the times when we give it to our PG thesis, we have a statistician who comes out, who gives advice, but you know that it is not correct. So I would, I will accept a few things, but most of the things I think that is not appropriate for the type of step. Told about regression. See, for logistic regression, that is a value that, for example, for the sample size should be 10 times. So if you have got a sample size of 40 patients, then at the most thing exists for logistic regression, but nothing of the same thing exists for a linear regression. Okay, so that's with the current sort of a statistical knowledge.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. It's a question to the panelists. Can you please point out the most commonly done errors and which is the reason for rejection of papers that are submitted to you? Dr. Murali Pudwal.
Well, most of the time it's just the way they don't conform to how a paper should be written. There is a lot of...
So, Sindar, can I give you editor's perspective here?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Go ahead.
The most common cause of rejections are, number one, out of scope. Many articles are not related to orthopedics and trauma that come to us. Second is the authors have forgot to read the guide for authors, which is a most neglected area. Most authors do not read. They keep submitting one paper after rejection to the other with the same format. So that is another one. Third is a very poor language. Fourth is very high similarity index. And, once you go through the abstract, it is a thesis paper or very outdated data. Somebody has done research 10, 12 years ago and now finding time to send it to your journal. So all those things are very common.
But with respect to statistical errors, statistical methods, which are the most common. I'm sorry. With respect to statistical methods, with the most common statistical errors that are done by the authors. Yes, sir, Dr. Karthikeyan.
I think the most common error is the numbers don't add up. And that again goes back to the main theme which we are discussing, is that the researcher or the article publisher should ask the statistician relevant questions. And for that, he needs to have the appropriate correct numbers at hand. Unless you give the proper data to the statistician, he is not going to come back with the proper outcomes. So I think first, the data collection should be robust. What outcomes you would like to see are important. Secondly, in the research question and your abstract and your methodology, the most important statement that has to be, what is your primary outcome and what are your secondary outcomes. And the third thing, most important thing, I feel, you need to comment on your limitation of the studies. There may be, say, you have a cohort of 100 patients. There may be 2 or 3 patients where you may not have some sub-data there. So you should comment that in your limitation of the study. That may skew your data, that may skew your statistics. So these all are effective, relevant things that needs to be clarified and explained in your methodology. And also, if there is a limitation, you should comment it in the limitation of your study. That's what I think is critical.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. Dr. Vijay Jain.
I think the most important thing is what I think is underpower study. Many of the paper which are submitted to the journal are related to the thesis. They have just 20 patients or 25 patients, and they just submit. So I think the one most important thing is underpower. Another thing is the use of inappropriate statistical tests, right? and another could be there could be the disparity between the result and the conclusion. So I think these are the few things which are important for outright rejection.
Yeah, just now you pointed out the disparity between the results and the conclusion. I would like to give a scenario. For example, there is a study that is an outcome-based study for elastic nailing of pediatric fractures, but the conclusion says elastic nailing of pediatric femur fractures are better than plating of femur fractures, but that was never studied. So we should not have unnecessary terminology in the conclusion. The conclusion has to be very, very clear to the point, and mention only based on what findings we have got from our study.
Another thing is the absence of any comparative groups, and or matched pair, or the lack of randomization is also the important thing, which is causing the problem.
Dr. Srinivas has something to say.
Can I add one more? I agree that the most common error is a low sample size. It's actually quoted as a limitation in a lot of studies. They say that the lower sample size is a limitation of the study. The other thing I feel is using inappropriate tools or scoring systems for studying an outcome that the tool does not measure. So if you use a tool which does not measure the outcome, then you may have a very good score with the scoring system, but it's actually not doing the job it's supposed to do. So I think it's important to use the right tools to get the right outcomes.
Yeah, Dr. Mohit.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir? As already pointed out, lack of good sample size. Usually, people submit studies without doing a priori sample size calculation. So that leads to they do not know what is the exact sample size necessary, and frequently we encounter studies with a very low sample size leading to underpowered studies. So the problem is now they say that it's actually unethical to conduct such studies with low sample size, as they are underpowered. So we are actually just wasting our resources. So people must do a priori sample size calculation and contemplate upon doing a study only if they reasonably think that they will be able to achieve this much of sample size. The second problem is, in many situations, non-parametric tests are more appropriate, but people use parametric tests. Although there are some differences among statisticians also regarding approach to statistical analysis, and many parametric tests are more somewhat robust to deviations from normality. But still, in several cases, a non-parametric test might be more suitable. And third point, in several studies, several manuscripts, we find that the follow-up duration is too less, like 6 months or 3 months. So actually, the findings are not that much clear. In such a small duration of follow-up, nothing can be concluded. And very high attrition rate is also observed sometimes. And if the attrition rate is more than 20%, that is, loss to follow-up is more than 20%, then conclusions get affected. And intention to treat analysis is also not sometimes performed even in RCTs. So these may be some of the reasons for rejection of studies.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mohit. Dr. Rehan.
Just taking on the discussion forward, something which may not be related to rejection, but something which is a problem which we usually see is that your conclusions are not based on your study itself, the idea which you were taking forward, right? So the study has been done on a PFN, and finally the conclusion which comes is that the PFN is a better device than a DHS sort of a situation. This is a very common problem that you encounter, and I think this is something which every clinician or every researcher must tell their students, that the conclusions have to be based on your own research rather than on the review of literature which has been done.
Yeah, thank you very much for the point. We have a direct question by Dr. Bhavuk Gar. He asks whether VAS score has to be considered as a numerical variable or a categorical variable. Dr. Karthik Vishwanath, can you answer this?
So the VAS score, because it is a decimal, it has got a decimal one. It is not the same as a numerical rating scale. Both of them are totally different. Numerical rating scale means you will ask the patient that if your pain is from 0 is no pain and 10. So you will be giving an number to them. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be calling it as a count number. So you'll be using median and interquartile range to describe numerical rating scale. However, for VAS, it can take any scale. So ideally, when you do a VAS scale, is you give a 10 centimeter line to them and ask the patient to mark anywhere on the line. So you will be measuring up to 2.1 or 2.2 or whatever comes on the scale, which you can measure it. So it is a numerical scale. So both measure pain, but both are treated different statistically.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Vishwanath. Dr. Vijay, do you have any? You have some questions for the other moderators?
Dr. Hitesh Lal has some question.
Dr. I have one question for Dr. Morley. Can we dare to insert tables in the abstract, as they have got a very powerful visual value?
I didn't get a question, sir.
Can we dare to put tables in the abstract, as they have got a very powerful visual communication?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. Most of them would not allow you to do it.
Can I answer? Many of the conference abstracts can have tables with them, but not in the research paper.
No, at least when we submit for engineering papers, in our abstracts, we can have a small summarization in the engineering conferences, because for the engineering conferences, whatever papers we submit, they go into a full text publication and they get indexed on. So their abstracts some of them do contain some visual elements, but at least from whatever journals I have been working with, I have not seen a table or a visual element within an abstract.
One more thing regarding abstract, I have found many authors are confused between abstract and conclusion. The abstract is the summary of whole paper, from material, method, result, conclusions, and so on. Whereas conclusion is the nutshell of the outcome of your study and what impact it has created. So these are two different. Many authors just put both the same things in the abstract as well as in conclusion.
The conclusion is actually just 2 sentences. This is what it means. That's it. No. Nothing more than that. Yeah. It should not be a long
should be at least 5-6 sentences.
Okay.
Anyway.
Dr. Mohit.
Yes, sir. A small comment regarding tables. I have seen that sometimes authors submit tables and they do not follow the typical recommendations, like they make their table with all the vertical lines, all the horizontal lines, but finally everything is rectified at the stage of typesetting. So is it truly necessary to follow all the guidelines regarding tables, because they may subsequently be rectified by the general staff at the typesetting stage?
Dr. Srinivas, do you want to say something about it?
I think it's important to submit the table in the form of the text or the table format in place of a figure. If you submit it as a figure, then the journal will be struggling to edit it. So it's important to submit it as in a Word document in the form of a table, so that it can be modified according to the journal. But if it is too much work for the journal, then they may be asked to revise their table.
Yes,
I think the work should be. I think the work should be presentable. If you go for a lunch or somewhere, the presentation should be good, rather than taste. Yeah. Taste is also important, but the presentation is also important.
Also, this is the format that goes to the reviewer. Na? It goes to the reviewer, right? This is what goes to the reviewer. So unless you put it in a proper manner and give it, whatever the processing being done by the publisher, that is later. But before that, it will give bad impact on the reviewer's mind.
I think we should consider the journal as our thesis guide, and we being the thesis candidate. So we should make the thesis guide happy, the journal happy. Otherwise, it's not going to go through.
And sometimes if the table is very, very large, it can be included as supplementary material.
Yes.
And the other thing is make sure that you don't send it as a shaded format. All the journals, they want simple tables, 2 by 2. And you should not have any shaded area. And most important, I think, as Srinivas has already commented, Make sure that the table legend is at the top, and abbreviations are the key, because a lot of the time I say ROS, SOB, and that is in the table, but nothing is explained at the bottom. So that is the key. Unless you do that, tables don't get through really.
So adding footnotes is a must. Yes, sir.
Correct.
Dr.
Yes.
Lalit is back. Any comments?
Yeah, comments. I think tables are pretty important. And I think as an editor, I want the author to submit in the format which has been asked for. So anything you're going to add on is going to be looked down at. For example, nobody expects a table to be given in blue, green, and red stripes. So if you're giving it in a colorful form, it's going to be a problem. Maybe it'll go back as a technical revision straight away, even before reaching me. And then the other issue, like common things you were looking at, common reasons for technical corrections, put all the possible tables you have in your thesis. So if you send 20 tables with your manuscript, it's going to go back without any review. So rule of thumb, maybe don't cross 5 to 7 combined figures and tables. And I think it's important to not duplicate. It's mentioned so many times, but it happens all the time, that the same detail of patient profiles and results are there in the manuscript as well as in the table. This is very hugely common. So that has to be looked into.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lalit Mani. Dr. Vijay.
I think one thing is important regarding making a table. Whenever we should make a table, it should be crisp and the redundant part should be removed. Suppose if you are writing a outcome, the outcome in 10 patients are excellent, 15 patients are good. So you just write 10 patients good. Means you have to remove is or the, and you have to make it crisp and make it small. All the redundant things should be removed and use as much as abbreviation as possible and put them down the table in the abbreviation in an alphabetical order.
I think within a cell of the value cell of a table, try to avoid as much detail as possible. Too much text or too much details should not be given. It should be very simple and easy to read.
Yeah. One more thing. When you are going to write about the suppose age or follow-up or outcome or anything, then you have to write. If you are writing in a month, then start with a month and write everything in the month. And if it is in the year, then everything is in the year, and week, then everything should be in the week. And again, one more thing is whenever you are going to write any review of literature, suppose you have found some case and there are 10 case reports, then you put it either in the alphabetical order or arrange them in a year-wise manner. So these are some good things, good practice, so that the one can understand the table better.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the take-home message with respect to repetition of details in the tables and in the text is the text could have only the trends in the values, some information on the trend in the value, whether it's significant or not, it's positive or negative trend, while the table can actually have the details of the confidence interval, etc. Dr. Karthik Krishna, you have something to say?
So as far the tables are concerned, we can have one table at the beginning to talk about the demographic characteristics of your group. That will save that much about, you'll be one table to describe your primary and secondary outcomes. So it can be a short and crisp presentation, and you concentrate more on what you want to tell to the readers, because there's a word limit of almost 2,500 words for most good journals. So, more you put it on tables, you can concentrate on the real stuff that you want to convey from your study.
Okay, Dr. Hitesh Lal has asked this question, whether we should include the standard difference and confidence interval in the table, whether this detail has to be shared. Your comment, Dr. Karthik.
Yes, sir. I feel both standard deviation will help, because if you have done a good RCT, and if that is going to be included in a meta-analysis, they would want that to be a part of it. So a meta-analysis, when they are going to, if it is a quantitative variable, mean and standard deviation are required. Very rare if the authors have only presented 95% confidence. But I agree with that it is better to present, when you present a primary outcome, better to mention the p-values, the difference, and also give the 95% confidence interval, because you can very well, looking at the confidence interval, you can say whether this is going to be just very close or above the MCID values. See, when we review for articles also, many times, you find that the authors have make no mention about the clinical significance. Actually, if you look, 3 days of, for any difference in, length of stay, 3 days, it is statistically significant, but how clinically is it significant? So that question one has to ask.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karthik. The next question is for Dr. Murali and the panelists. It's a very, very common question. Can you give us tips on how to create a schematic illustration? Do you have any suggestions for applications in Apple or Android to draw a picture illustration for a publication?
2 ways to do it. I think I can do almost anything on PowerPoint now. Not before I joined this company. But since I joined this company, I realized that PowerPoint is a very powerful tool. You can create anything you want on it. You want to create a flowchart, you want to create a schematic, you want to do a diagram, you can do that. Second thing, I think you have enough tools in your hands. You have your Apple pencils, or you have your drawing boards. You can create anything you want. So the tools are not different. And as far as your bar plots and your bar as scatter plots, all of these can be created by simply using the insert tool and selecting the data on your Excel sheet. It is just a question of a click. That's all that your guy does. Even your statistician does, is simply select the data and then export it in whatever software he's using. The very same can be done with Excel. All it takes is to get a little familiarity with both Excel and PowerPoint, and then use your imagination and let it loose to describe what you want to describe. Like that Apple Watch diagram I did, it required us just a picture of a watch on a hand, and the rest of it was taken in PowerPoint only. So it was not very difficult to do that. Other advanced tools, if you want, you can explore Corel Draw and all that. But I would be pretty much satisfied with this, because the more complex I get, the more complex it's more difficult for my reader also to understand. So the more simpler I am, the better for me.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Lalit Mani, you have something to say?
Yeah, I think I second Murali's thoughts, and the dimensions now which are available on PowerPoint, Excel, and Word are amazing. So it might be a good thing to do that. Just Google YouTube tutorials on PowerPoint and keep attending them. They're short tutorials, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and keep playing with PowerPoint. You can do amazing work.
Thank you very much. That is very good information. Just to add on, with respect to line diagrams, I found Adobe Draw in my hands to be a very simple way in which I can sort of modify or draw new images, just like Dr. Murali Pudwal pointed out. With the Apple Pencil and Apple iPad, you can do a lot of wonders with respect to drawing images. Thank you very much. Any other comments on the illustrations?
I think the latest iPad as well has got a lot of features that you can use for drawing figures. I use PowerPoint for all the illustrations. It's very powerful, as Murali and Professor Mani had mentioned. For charts and graphs, Excel has got most of the options available. So I think PowerPoint is the first place to go.
I have tried to use a biorender. So, for example, pie charts and graphs are easy in PowerPoint or Excel. But if you say want to draw a rheumatological process, say how does anti-CCP antibody work on mast cell and then on plasma cell, then how do the antibodies? BioRender is a very excellent, but it is a paid app. But you can extrapolate, you can save it on your laptop and then use it as that. So that is another way. So that's the other question was, are there any other free apps to draw free schematic cellular diagrams, explaining a pathology, orthopedic pathology? I think I did find it difficult to find free ones or which are copyright protected. I think that's what all the people who are seeing this webinar would like to know. Are there easy, approachable, copyright-free apps which you can do orthopedic pathology images, cellular level, biological level?
Not that I know of, Dr. Iyengar. I have not heard of any. And second thing, if people are really wanting to do this on a very regular level, it would be good to spend some money on these apps, because you will need to quote which app you have used to create the illustration also when you submit the paper.
Yeah.
Dr. Vijay.
There are two apps are available. One is BioRenders. It is very good tool, and recently a paper in Nature in 2020 has written about this app, and it is an app device in Canada, and it has got more than 30,000 images, and it's an excellent tool, and it is free for 14 days. You can make your picture, and then you can change your email ID, and you can again use it. And if you want to use it, it is not of much cost. I think it is just 30 euros for 1 month. Another thing is Adobe. I'm using Adobe, and I have used it for last several years, and it is very useful for making pictures and other diagrams.
Adobe is also paid, right? Adobe is not.
Yeah, Adobe is paid. I have.
But quite a significant amount of payment. It's about £150 for a year, and that you need to. So it's a very costly affair, to be honest.
Yeah, Dr. Mohit.
Yes, sir. A question regarding tables, regarding table headings in particular, sir. So, in some, particularly while doing review articles, we come across a problem. In some of the papers, we see that the age data was normally distributed, so they provided us with means and standard deviation. In other papers, the age data was found to be non-normal, so they provide us with median and interquartile range. Still, in other papers, they provide with median and range. So I think in each cell, we need to specify what has been provided by the authors of that particular paper, and in the heading, we should mention age only. So what should be our approach regarding this?
Dr. Karthik and Dr. Srinivas, do you like to answer on this?
Yes. So see, the moment first time the data comes to us for reviewing, that itself, you know what type of distribution has had, you still send it for, a review process when it comes back. And when you ask for revisions, and a few times I've got out where I think that this data has been, then you can easily find out. As regards, for most of the standard papers, the requirement for parametric data would be mean and standard deviation. Though some of the British journals will not want us to use the sign of plus and minus, but by and large, mean and standard deviation across most international journals is acceptable. If it is, for somebody to put age as median and interquartile range, I'm a bit continuous data is good, but you should not be using median and interquartile range for that. Usually for days of hospitalization or number of blood transfusions where you expect the data to be skewed, that is the only time you'll use median and interquartile range. So the moment if somebody is putting age as interquartile range and median, then I'm going to get wary. I'll be going very deeply into that manuscript to really find out, something else is going on.
Sir, my question was about when preparing table for a systematic review. Literature review article, we encounter some papers in which they provide median and range like that, and in others they provide mean and standard deviation. So how to go about preparing tables for such cases?
So the shortlisted papers would have data presented in different ways. Example is age and maybe follow-up years, months, somewhere weeks, and somewhere years.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So how to present it in the table?
I think if there are no more questions, then I would ask Professor Lalit to give a concluding remark.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah. Okay.
While I was suggesting about drawing a diagram, if you trace a figure from any source and then you get the basic framework and draw with your free hand, is it ethical to load this figure or not?
This is a simpler way of doing it. And
if you redraw it with permission, that's better. Otherwise, if you're going to trace it and then call it your own, then it is definitely not.
Trace it and draw with your free hand. You got the basic framework at least.
So that could be applicable actually if you could say that a knee is a knee, it will look like the same whether you trace it or don't.
Yeah.
So that is virtually untraceable. But I would not say here that it is ethical, not the right place to say so.
But you can do some modifications, then I think it will be acceptable.
So for example, if you're using
go on.
If you're using a fracture model to show some schematic of your technique, you can copy the fracture model from somewhere. But however, if you're copying a technique from an X-ray of a publication and making it a schematic by tracing, that is not allowed.
No, like drawing a nerve course or drawing something else, like drawing anything.
I would like to add that a figure actually conveys an idea, right? If your idea is different, your figure will also be different, right? But if you're trying to convey the same idea and then whatever drawing you take, it is actually going to fall in the net of plagiarism. So it is about copying an idea and then trying to represent it in the form of a figure. If your idea is not original, then your figure is also not original.
But that will provide a basic framework, that's all.
So I think I'll reframe the question. Hitesh is asking, like, if you want to show a diagram of a stab in the volar aspect of the wrist, and you want to show the anatomy of the wrist, the median nerve, the ulnar nerve, can he trace the median and the ulnar nerve from Gray's anatomy and then add the knife himself? I think that is possible.
Why not?
That's not an issue because that is anatomy. That is common knowledge. You cannot just use the same color as in Gray's anatomy and then try to put a knife on it. That's not right. That's not something that you would be doing it, right?
I think as long as it is not majorly similar to the original illustration, it should not be an issue.
But at the same time, Sachinder, there is major similarity between all of us human beings. That we cannot make every picture of the same part different.
The colors, exactly.
I do same for everyone.
But the colors of that are used, the size, the shape.
Yeah, the orientation, the shading of the colors, and
but see, at least the reference image, Professor Lal, great question that one, because the reference will be the same. The reference is human anatomy. And that human anatomy has been sketched somewhere, so we know about it. So we cannot draw it original. But yes, the idea and the description has to be different. It should not look like it is copied at least. So, and it's very easy to pick up when it is copied, when we are all sitting on the table.
I think we are about to conclude within our allotted time, 5 minutes actually early. So that can be taken by Professor Lalit Mani to conclude.
Is there a software to check for plagiarism in figures?
I do believe that I work with Finger Nature for a book. I do believe they have a software for checking for plagiarism for images, but I don't exactly know the details. Maybe I can try to find out, but it is definitely there.
Is there one Google software?
There is even reverse image search in Google. Previously, Google used to provide reverse image search, but now Google has stopped that. There is one website, TinEye, that provides reverse image search, but I wouldn't call it a wonderful website or software to do reverse image search. But I think there are professional ways in which to search for the original images available with big companies. I don't have access to it. Maybe we can try to find out. Yes. Over to Dr. Lalit Mani for the conclusion session.
Yeah, I would also invite if any of the faculty or the panelist wants to give any comment. Anything from anybody? Rohit?
And I must say this is one of the great learning experience for all the faculty members, if I can say on their behalf as well, because I've learned quite a bit from this. What I've suggested to both you and Dr. Vaishya is we should do a similar one for our reviewers. So where we can do this to our reviewers, so we get better reviewers as editors, we get a better quality review, we can make a decision. I think some of the big journals have been doing this. It's time that JCOT and IGO should take a leap on this and start a course for the reviewers. Invite our current reviewers, invite the newer ones who wants to join us, and then take it from there. And maybe do this more often, because I loved it. Must say I love this. Thank you.
I had put the brochure of our course to Apollo Group of Hospital Consultant, and the first remark came that all the speakers are orthopedic surgeons, and so far our image of orthopedic surgeon was that they are non-academic. But I had to remind them that most of the orthopedic surgeons were the brightest of the students in their batches. So now the time has come that they do the research and publication, and I'm sure once they start doing it, they'll be far ahead the new people.
Srinivas?
Yes, a lot about this one. Actually, I would echo the statements of Rohit, actually. It's a very good learning experience. I've learned from all the talks from today, actually, and the discussion was very valuable.
Murli, yeah.
I was actually disappointed this year I won't get to go to Delhi. Thanks for making this happen. So it was really nice, and at least could meet all my colleagues here, and as always, tremendous learning experience. And Dr. Vaishya and Dr. Mani, hats off to you. This course was different from last year, and that was different from the year before that. And to bring that difference on subject matter that is essentially similar takes quite a bit. That's good. It's a very good course, just at all. I'm looking forward to the next year.
Dr. Iyengar, Dr. Rajiv?
I think I enjoyed it tremendously. I have not met any of you before, and to see on a common platform I can't express my gratitude to all of you. Really, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the talk. Karthik, I know from back in England, but I've made virtual friends. That's all I can say.
We'll meet physically someday.
Rajiv?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think since I was the opening batsman today, I had to sit through the rest of it. Not only because I was the first to start, but also because the remaining lectures were pretty interesting to listen to. The different perspective to things. The talk on the statistics was very good for me in the sense that it gave me a nutshell what I have been sort of lacking for the last maybe 3-4 years. So great work, sir. Great work. Continue this. Keep carrying on.
Okay, then I think thanks to all of you taking out time for this event. We could not plan it very long ahead. We planned it a bit fast this time because we were not very sure whether we are doing it physical, hybrid, or online. But thanks to all the faculty and especially the speakers who took the pains to send the recordings in time so that we could get out of this hitch of, am I visible and am I audible? So great content. And Murli was telling that we've maybe reshaped the same content. But then hats off to all the speakers. I think if you say the topics are same in research methodology, but I don't think any talk was such which did not appear fresh. Everything looked so fresh that I'm up since 8 o'clock this morning, and I've concluded one event at 3:30. But I was sure from the core of my heart that I would attend this one also completely, and I've managed it. So thanks a lot, and I think that's a very good feedback from Rohit and Srinivas that we should do something for reviewers, and also take the lead on getting structuring of the review process also. So
I think that's been on your mind for a long time.
Yes, it has been. So the thanks is the thing which I wanted to convey, and also thanks for contributing to both the journals as editorial board members, reviewers, and authors. And definitely salute the guys who have been attending this webinar. We've already, I think, touched 3,000 people across the globe attending this webinar. And I don't see any research methodology event touching these heights. So we see an interest developing, and we are encouraged, and will definitely come out with more. So with that, I think we close today's session and say bye to all, and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Good night.
Thank you
Bye,
all.
everyone.
Bye, sir. Thank you very much. Wonderful experience.
Thanks, Dr. Rajiv. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.